All right. Looks like we have everybody here. Ryan, let's take a roll.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mayor Godis.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman.
Here.
Counselor Wusso.
Present.
Counselor Kaut.
Here.
Counselor Davis. Counselor Stepp.
Yes.
Counselor Hershey.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, I'll lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any agenda changes or conflicts of interest this evening from anybody? All right, seeing none, I will go back to citizens appearing before council. These are for items not on the agenda. If it's on the agenda, I would love to hear from you, but if you could save those comments for when that agenda item is up, that'd be great. Otherwise, if there are things that people want to talk about that are not on the agenda, now's your time. Okay. Seeing none, I'll bring it back for council comments. Go ahead, Tony.
I know everyone's going to be very upset, but I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to not talk very much tonight, but I certainly am listening and I'm here and I'll try to talk. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Councilor Willman.
Yeah, I brought up during the work session earlier on, and a couple of people were late getting there and they may not have heard this. So if we're going to put anything in the May ballot for the charter, the deadline we have is the completion of that has to be done by the first meeting in March, which means we need to do it fairly quickly. I would propose that we have a work session in the first meeting in February, when we'll have most of us there to discuss issues, including the issue of whether or not we change the way the mayor is elected in the town. I've had a lot of feedback from people who think that the mayor should be elected. I'm not so sure that I support or don't support that, but I think it's a discussion we should have. And because I don't think we want to put it that kind of a topic at the general ballot in November, and I don't favor having a special election, I think we should have that as a work session discussion, and that should be to allow public input as well. It's going to be tough because that's a morning meeting with a work session, but I do want to, or we can maybe make it right before the meeting in the afternoon, but I think we should have that in that first meeting in February.
Is that a motion, or is that just a throw it out and see if it sticks?
Well, I mean, I want to see if there's support. If I'm the only one that thinks that ought to be there, then there's no purpose in having a motion and going through that exercise. So,
Well, then I will say I'm supportive of that, of a work session to have that discussion.
And I guess I'd be supportive of it too. I think there's a lot of things we need to incorporate into that. We need to look at the census to determine wards. We need to talk about if there's 4 wards and 3 at-larges, whether whether a council of 5 makes more sense. I mean, let's have the much larger conversation, as well as timing and whether a special election or a municipal election is a good time to have that. But I think as long as we can incorporate, oops, sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. I think as long as we can incorporate some of those larger issues that would have to contemplate.
well, I think there's also, just look at the structure. If we continue to have a council appointed mayor, like Montrose has, it's a rotating. Somebody has a mayor for 1 year and everybody has to take a run at it for 1 year. That's an option. Those are things that ought to be discussed, and whether we keep the current method and just change the dynamic a little bit, that's also up for discussion.
Okay. It's been moved by Charlie, seconded by Ingrid to have this work session in the, is it the March meeting?
No, the first meeting in February.
First meeting in February, okay. Let's call the question. Ryan, go ahead.
Counselor Hershey,
Yes.
Counselor Stepp,
Yes.
Counselor Kelp,
Yes.
Counselor Wusso,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Wilman, or Mayor Pro Tem
Yes.
Wilman, excuse me, and Mayor
Okay,
Godis.
yes.
And Mayor Godis.
Yes.
All right, it passes 7-0.
Tony, do you still have your hand up from the previous comment? No, okay. Charlie, anything else? Nope, okay. Shelley, go ahead.
Okay, let me know if you can hear me okay. I'm getting a little bit of internet trouble, so I might try turning my video off for a minute. Okay. I just have a couple of quick comments and then a question for council. I want to say, first of all, thank you, Deborah or staff. I don't know who's doing this, but all of a sudden on our staff memos for council, we have the strategic goals, the tie in there. I really appreciate that. And it's helpful. So thank you. And then I'd also like to say thanks to our public works team, just in general, that keep the city running. I think it's often, it's work that's taken for granted, but it's so important. And so I just encourage people in the public and throughout our residents and businesses just to say a thank you to all of our public works teams, as well as our parks, our streets, those other departments that keep our city running. I had a conversation with Matt Langhorst a couple of weeks ago about some of the broken pipes that they were having to track down, some pretty major water leaks, and getting those repaired. And I think that stuff goes on often behind the scenes, and people don't realize how much work it is. It also plays into why it was so important that we had to raise our water rates. So just, it takes a lot to run a city, and I'm really appreciative of all of our workforce. So lastly, at our RAFTA meeting last week, there was a pretty nice presentation on RAFTA's plans at their Glenwood maintenance facility and the expansions that are going on there. So they're also looking at, there was kind of a decision made not to have all the bus traffic in a major transit hub in the middle of our downtown. So they've moved that plan out to West Glenwood. So I was wondering if, Deborah, if possibly we could coordinate for RAFTA to bring that presentation to council, because I don't know how much of council is aware of like the magnitude and scope of what's being planned out there.
I will ask Dan.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Shelley? Nope, looks like not. Go ahead, Paula.
Reiterating what Shelley said, that our city staff is amazing, including things that they give up, like Brianna Starbuck last night celebrating her birthday with us, discussing a listening session. So happy birthday, Brianna. And I just wanted to give a quick heads up that I am having terrible trouble with internet today. And so if I go to video, it's just because I'm trying to stay connected, and want to say that ahead of time because I know we should be keeping our video on. That's it.
Okay. I have a question. We saw an update from Deborah, I believe last week. I think it's in our packet, about just evacuation planning, how it's going. Is a really comprehensive update based on several meetings. So for, I guess one, I want to say to the public, we are working as I don't want to use her frantically, but we're working very diligently with urgency on evacuation and what that means for the community. I think we saw, how CDOT worked with the community the last year to shut down at exit or at Highway 13 in Rifle, so town didn't get congested. But Deborah or Terry, can you kind of give us an update, if you have an update, or maybe want to summarize kind of some of those findings? That I think the public would love to hear about that.
Would you please, Mr. Mayor, pull over Terry, because she is leading the effort
Yes, I can.
along with the fire department, but.
You're muted.
It doesn't say that she's muted. Are your speakers on the computer? Your physical speakers on, Terry?
Should we make a sidebar comment about our engineer? I just teased you, Terry.
One sec. Looks like.
If she cannot, I mean, I can do a poor job of what she will do a much better job on.
Looks like she's logging off to log back in, as I'm guessing. Okay, I'm going to promote her again. Nope. Deborah, I think you're on until Terry can just interrupt everyone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yay. All right, sorry about that. So as Deborah and you said, we have had multiple meetings with CDOT. You know, we started explaining the issue of how our system fills up with traffic. You know, when we have a closure of the 114, we explained it to CDOT and to FHWA. We proposed a few different ideas to them, including the ideas of having, they call them access line breaks between Highway 6 and I-70 going back eastbound to be able to clear traffic from our north and our west neighborhoods. FHWA was receptive. They've asked us to give them some narrative and some plans on exactly where those access line breaks are and you know, their design in specific. And we also have met with Colorado State Patrol as well as CDOT, talking about how you know, these access line breaks would work, along with, you know, closures on I-70, which we've already set up, you know, with the Glenwood Canyon process, as well as a potential closure on State Highway 82 to the south. Again, to try to prevent that afternoon traffic from reaching our system and kind of clogging up our system. So all of those things are kind of overlapping each other, and we're working continuously with them to try to move it forward. Jessica is actually looking for survey right now to complete the design for the access line breaks. And it does seem like FHWA is receptive, and we're working hard to try to get those in place for the summer if we can.
That's great.
And I would just say in layman's terms, if it's not fully understandable, is, you know, we stop the traffic coming into town in both ways, and then therefore we can get people out using the highway. So it's, while not super complicated to think about, the process to get there is a little complicated, but I think we're making really good progress.
Awesome. Paula?
That's great news, Terry. And I know that you explained a little of that to me a few months ago. Do you see anything as far as organizing streets in our communities on kind of that kind of thing? Is there something being prepared that way on these? From my understanding, everybody kind of gets backed up in their neighborhood. So how do we kind of do something there?
Jessica and I have been working on that too. Actually, Jessica worked hand in hand with Jake Valesky with our street department. And, we started with kind of a bare bones plan about what we would do if we can stop traffic on the highways, as Deborah tried to explain in layman's terms, that, our whole transportation system is really tied to the highway. When the highway backs up, as many people have seen, particularly in North Glenwood, but all over, if we have a line of cars on State Highway 6, for instance, the entire North Glenwood can't move anywhere. It completely blocks the system. So our first moves are obviously to try to keep that highway traffic out of town so that we can get out. But we have worked through our internal network and talked about places where we would redirect traffic and try to control particularly the 114 and the 116 so that we can move neighborhoods out in different directions. We have to consider different closures, east, west, and south. So it actually is pretty complex when we look at it from a city standpoint. But like I said, our first steps are trying to control the highway traffic getting in.
Charlie?
Yeah, I agree. And I appreciate the work that's being done, Terry. And I think that part of it's really important. It's real easy. That's easy, but once you get the access out in West Glenwood on I-70, that's going to be a big piece. But we got to be able to keep people moving. I think we've seen in fires on the eastern slope a few weeks ago and out in California that gridlock was a major problem. And it's going to happen, but anything we can do to reduce that and to assure citizens that we're motivated to come up with a plan. And then as soon as we get as much detail as we can, I think we need to get it out there and almost be hitting people over the head with it all over and over and over again. So if something happens, it's almost what they do. So when Deborah and I talked about this yesterday, I think that was, I think that's really important that's there. Number one, number two, that people do understand that we are looking at evacuation. We understand we're in a narrow valley and we're looking at that issue. So thank you guys for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Charlie?
Gary, do we have traffic models of our streets network that can model this? Or is that something that would be worthwhile and helpful for the city to budget and invest in?
It would be helpful, but a model like that would be really large. And it's, I used to talk to Chief Wilson about evacuations, and his comments were that it was very difficult to predict where the fire would come from. So the scenarios are really, very complex. I think, it may be worthwhile. I'd like to talk to a few people and see what they think. But, we actually, with the Glenwood, with the annexation proposal, the 480 Donegan proposal, they were willing to do some, help us with some modeling in that way. And if we proceed with that kind of development, we probably would take them up on their offer to help us with modeling. But let me think about that a little bit more.
Okay, yep, just keep us posted. Thanks.
All right. Any other council comments this evening? Terry, thank you very much. That's great update. Probably, if we have any more information that comes out in the next couple months, I think the more you share it with us, the more the public probably hears it, can be informed. I think it's something the public really likes to hear and be up to date on.
Sure. Yeah, we can do a presentation, to show you, where we are and what we're thinking about at some point in time. We do have some planning around those access line breaks and some thoughts around controls on State Highway 82 and even our internal network. We could give you some of our preliminary thinking about that.
That'd be great. I'd love that kind of presentation.
Okay.
All right. Any other council comments? I guess that was more of a council/staff presentation, but appreciate it. Seeing none, I'll look for a motion for the consent agenda.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I'll second that. Been moved by Paul, seconded by myself. All those in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye. It looks like unanimous. Okay, passes 7-0. All right, next item, Planning and Zoning Commission appointments. Does staff want to present? I mean, we have the candidates that we have interviewed. Is there a motion? Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I would move that we appoint Pete Waller and Amy Connerton as the planning and zoning representatives, bringing them up from alternate to full-time members. And we appoint James Woodrow Hardcastle Jr. and Mitchell Weimer as alternates with, I think, 3-year terms starting in February.
I'll second. It's been moved by Charlie, seconded by myself. Ryan, let's call the question.
Mayor Godus,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Hershey,
Yes.
Counselor Cow,
Yes.
Counselor Wusso,
Yes.
Counselor Stepp,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman,
Yes.
and like the great number 7 Bronco, it passes.
That's not Manning, by the way, everybody, just in case you're wondering. All right, thanks, everybody. Next item is the Uinta Basin Railway presentation. We have Dita Seed, who's presenting. Go ahead, Dita, anytime.
Hello, thanks for inviting me, and greetings from Salt Lake City. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. We'll see how that goes. Hopefully it will work right away. Okay, can you all see my screen? Yes, awesome. Okay, whoops, and I'm already moving ahead of myself. So this map that you're looking at is a map of the Uinta Basin Railway, the proposed Uinta Basin Railway. It would be about 85 miles long. Its terminus would be in, can you see my cursor if I'm moving it around? It would be in Mighton, Utah, and the Leland Bench. And this is the Uinta Basin here, and over here is Colorado, obviously. So the purpose of the railway is to export, their goal is to export 350,000 barrels a day of waxy crude out of the Uinta Basin on this railway system. And so it would come down what's called Indian Canyon and then connect just north of Price, Utah. And then it would connect, this is the main line of the Union Pacific. It would connect to the main line. Oops, not letting, oops, sorry. Let's see if it will let me advance just one. Okay. To the Union Pacific Railway here. There's no, I don't know what this is. There's nothing named Cedar, ignore that. But as you can see, it comes into Colorado, and then it would come through your city. Here's another map that's a Colorado specific map. You can see Glenwood Springs. So the issue for you is that you would be potentially subject to up to 10 2-mile-long oil trains per day coming through Glenwood Springs. And the concerns are basically around derailment. These are really heavy, what's called unit trains. They do have a lot of safety problems because they're so heavy. These would also be heated oil tankers because waxy crude needs to be kept at a certain temperature, otherwise it solidifies. So issues around derailment, issues around fire, both from the heated tankers and the equipment used to heat them, and if there were to be a spill or an accident, a derailment could cause a fire. So there's wildfire, there's community risk. There are impacts potentially to the Colorado River because when waxy crude, there are few examples actually, like people don't transport waxy crude because it's so problematic to transport. But there are some examples where there have been spills and it's really hard to clean up. It's not something that you can clean up in the traditional way that you would clean up an oil spill. So there could be impacts to the Colorado River. And then there are general environmental harms that would come from this whole project. The yearly carbon emissions from the amount of waxy crude that they want to extract equals 53 million tons per year, which is equal to about 6 coal plants. And then all of this would contribute to air pollution in the Uinta Basin, and because the wind moves the air to the east, it would, unfortunately, that pollution would drift into Colorado to the western slope. So those are, I'm going to stop sharing. That's a really broad brushstroke overview of what this is. Do you have any questions? Shelley?
Thank you.
Hi, Dita. Thank you for being here. I'm trying to wrap my head around a 2-mile long train or even a mile-long train. Is that something that's common? Or, I mean, I see coal trains come through, but they're probably not even, a quarter of a mile. I don't know.
Yeah, for unit trains, which these would be, it is unfortunately common. And that's what, so what I've just presented to you is based on what the developers told the Surface Transportation Board. So this is what the proponents of the project are saying, and this is what the environmental impact statement says.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'd have to have some understanding, like how long would it take a 2-mile train to pass through our downtown? Just trying to wrap my head around that.
No, it would be a while. And I was just listening to y'all talk about the problems that you have already just with traffic on the highway. I mean, this would be really burdensome for every community that these trains go through, especially smaller communities. It's going to be very, very burdensome. And that's what we're trying to convey to the powers that be to stop this.
Paula.
Always that mute and unmute. Can you go back to what you said? I mean, I've just kind of read a little bit about this, but I'd like to get a sense of, they've gone through an environmental impact statement. Some things have been approved. How does whatever happened in Utah at a federal or state level relate to what can be done in Colorado?
Yeah, good question. So where we are in this process is that the National Environmental Policy Act process has been completed. And the Surface Transportation Board, which is the body that would approve or disapprove this project, approved it. However, there was a very notable dissent that was offered, and I can send you all this if you're interested. Martin Oberman, who is the chair of the Surface Transportation Board, recently appointed chair by President Biden, wrote a scathing dissent. He sees absolutely the harm from this project in terms of harm to the environment, but also he questions the project based on the transportation merits and questions the financing of it and actually whether it's financially viable, which, I mean, that could be a silver lining for us. If it's not funded, then we're all saved from this. But anyway, the Surface Transportation Board approved the project. And so there is one more approval that has not happened. That's a piece of this. And that is, in order to get through, in the map that I showed you in the beginning, where it's coming through Utah, and that's a new rail line, it goes through the Ashley National Forest, through a roadless area. And the Forest Service has issued a preliminary approval of a right-of-way, but they have not issued the final record of decision. And so what we're engaged with right now is trying to get the attention of the person above the Forest Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, and say, hey, this is really a bad project. Please don't approve this right-of-way. So that's what we're working on right now. The other thing that is in the mix is litigation. We're looking at all of our options there, and there is a possibility that this will be litigated.
And the National Forest, of course, that always is a picture in anybody's head as a layperson that's filled with trees. And then the next picture that comes up is potential forest fire. Is that part of that discussion with what you were saying earlier?
Absolutely. I mean, in Utah, just as you in Colorado are suffering from the mega drought, I mean, it's really bad here, and we're just, one flame away from a disastrous fire. And there are huge concerns about this rail line going through this area. It didn't show it on the map I showed you, but it's a very steep canyon. There are questions about the stability of the soil. They're going to have to build tunnels, and it's just a mess. And yeah, I mean, there could be a forest fire in the Ashley National Forest that would be catastrophic.
And my last question is, does this go through a Native American reservation?
It does. Part of
my
it
mind
does.
is blank.
Yes, and so that is a little bit of a complicating factor. It goes through a reservation owned by the Northern Utes, and they have offered support for the project. In talking to them, they're not super enthusiastic about it. I think they kind of felt that they didn't really have, like, it was the least bad choice. And they also, quite honestly, suffer from a lot of poverty on their reservation. And so things that have an economic development component are very appealing to them. So a section of this does go through their reservation.
Thank you.
Charlie?
More of a question for Carl. Carl, I understand from some information we got earlier today that we could put some regulations in place under House Bill 74-1041 that might give us some leverage here. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think it's doubtful that it would have too much leverage on this particular issue because it's moving through, unless it would be stopping or citing here for some reason. And that's just because it's governed by it's an interstate commerce clause set of regulations that really govern rail use. But it's one of those things that we feel like, that might give us potentially some leverage in some way, depending on what operations actually look like. My understanding, this is a fair, there's a number of steps before it would go active, including, even in worst case scenario, if they got approval for the line from the Forest Service and built the line and all of that. So, there is some time on that front to really understand how we could best apply pressure, I think, also on the political front, if we need to.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Steve.
Well, I'm just curious, oil producers produce oil. What's the alternative if they aren't allowed to bring it down this particular rail? Is there another rail, or are they trucking all this oil?
So one of their challenges is that waxy crude is very expensive to transport. And so this project is designed to help them make a profit, basically. But they need the rail line to transport the volumes that they say they're interested in producing. Right now, they're producing about 80,000 barrels a day, and they're trucking that on on 40 to Salt Lake City. They could up that a little bit and truck some of it down 191 to Price, but they could not get to the vast amount that they're talking about, the 350,000 barrels, without the rail. The rail really enables the production.
And so just a follow up to that, you're saying that they're trucking quite a bit of this now to Salt Lake City. Is there a refinery in Salt Lake City that they're using there? And why don't they just take it all to Salt Lake City?
Oh yeah, there are 3 refineries in Salt Lake City. If you've been to Salt Lake City recently, during like an inversion we're having now, we have horrible air quality problems here. Over the last few weeks, we've had some of the worst air quality in the world. And so our refineries are at capacity. They cannot take any more of this waxy crude. And, so the plan is, like, if the railway doesn't happen, then the pattern will be that the 80,000 will continue to come to Salt Lake City. And, the Uinta Basin won't produce 350,000 barrels a day, which, I'll just be frank, that's a scenario that we'd like to see play out.
Any other questions? I'll just make a quick comment. I think that this is something we should be very concerned about in Glenwood Springs. We're a rail town, so I'm not begrudging train traffic coming through our town, but 10 2-mile long trains, 20 miles worth of oil trains coming through the town is quite an impact. And that's not to even talk about the delicate and hazard prone infrastructure that those tracks are on throughout Glenwood Canyon, susceptible to rock slides, rock falls, even in the best of years. And I think that those are things we should all be very considerate of. I think that down valley communities like Silt, Grand Junction, Mesa County, where communities are getting their drinking water directly off the Colorado, where our fishing and rafting industry lives and thrives, I think is all very concerning. But in addition, Glenwood Springs is a community that is very, very vulnerable and susceptible to climate change, and burning 53 tons, million tons per year. In and of itself, I think is something that we should have an interest in. So I think however we can be supportive of as a community in helping to not have this happen on a multiple of levels, I think is something that I personally am very interested in. And I'd like to hear from any other council members to see if they also feel similar. Go ahead, Paula.
I think I'm definitely on the similar track as you, Jonathan, pun intended. Just from my perspective of protecting our water on the Colorado River and its impact, as you just mentioned, economically, recreation, just protecting it as a source of water in a time of drought is, that's a very hot point right now in the whole Colorado River Basin. And I just think we have to do what we can to make sure that we're taking care of this source water that is used by 40 million people. And we have to really carefully consider where we stand on certain things like this. And I'm not trying to stop progress or stop business or that type of stuff, but we do have to find that balance of what works for us in this state, in this community, and for the communities along the Colorado River.
Am I up? Sorry, can't hear you. I'm going to take my
Sorry.
mic off again. Okay.
Go ahead, Shelley. I'm sorry. I was muted myself.
All right. I completely agree with Paula. I would think even on a statewide and Colorado River Basin level, you know, we have, sorry, I'm trying to find a couple of comments that I put down here. You know, the Colorado River is heavily relied upon for millions of people in the West. So it's a threat to the health and integrity of the river. In the, you know, the precious water that far outweighs the benefits of the project, just the integrity of the river. Not to mention the potential economic input or impact to Glenwood Springs. You know, we saw impact this last 2 years with the fire in 2020 and then the mudslides, closure of the canyon, the impact to the highway in 2021. You bring a project like this through, you know, not to mention the fact that that train is traveling cutting right through the middle of our downtown, literally right across the river from one of our major tourist attractions and right next to our festival street. And I'd be interested in figuring out how much time a day that would be coming through and what types of, you know, do you get off gassing from the train? Is there anything like, are there air quality things associated just with the train itself also? But also the threat of any kind of an accident with going through the canyon or going through when it heads along the Colorado River kind of northeast, you know, heading up towards the Moffett Tunnel, I believe is the route that it takes. So, you know, there's threats. We've already had the closures of I-70. That's a threat we're going to have ongoing for the next decade with mud flows in the burn scar areas that can affect the railroad and the highway. So I think adding this on top of that, I just cannot see how we can tolerate those kinds of risks with offsetting, you know, not even to mention the climate change impacts. And what is the benefit of a project like that, except to a very kind of concentrated area? So I'm hoping we can get broader statewide support on trying to slow or block this project if we can, and even federal support if we can get that.
Thanks, Shelley. Ingrid.
So I obviously echo a handful of the comments that other counselors have made, but ultimately I think I'm curious, is the goal for those who brought this in front of us to support the letter that was in our packet? And if so, you know, I would happily support that. I think that it sets the precedent of, you know, our concern. It raises consciousness in our communities about what is going on, because so few people probably even have an awareness of this. And so ultimately, you know, if you're looking for a motion to support, to have us all sign this letter, you know, I am absolutely willing to do that and just kind of move this forward as far as we collectively feel that this is important. It's important for our community regionally and nationally as well, to just make these decisions that support proactive discussion and kind of insulating and protecting our natural resources then in our area, which also means protecting our tourism economy and our small town. So if I need to do a motion, I'm happy to do it.
I would appreciate that.
Okay, great. So I will make a motion that we sign as a body from the city council the letter that was in the packet from this evening that's on the agenda packet, and that we submit it to whatever groups or agencies deemed appropriate.
I will second that, Ingrid, but I would ask for one revision. I did read the letter and it's a really good start, but I think we have a lot of very specific impacts and some specific histories of the last couple of years that we can bring up. And I think personalizing a letter and sending our own letters to the senators would be more powerful, actually.
Can I revise my motion then to appoint Shelley and Jonathan to revise the letter to include Shelley's recommendations and once again, get it off to whomever we feel appropriate.
Are you good with that, Mr. Mayor?
I would be happy and honored.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. I'll second that.
Okay.
Okay, it's been moved by Ingrid, seconded by Shelley. Charlie?
I'm going to support this concept. I did look at the letter. I think I'm not appreciate whoever took all the energy to put it in there. I agree with the comment just made about personalizing it. I also would encourage you to shorten it. You know, you got to keep in mind that you're sending this to people, you want to get their attention, but you don't want them to get bored the second paragraph in and read, look, I got a 2.5-page letter and not pay attention to it. So I would encourage you to be more succinct as you work on your redrafting, but I definitely support this concept.
Okay, and if wanted, you know, we can certainly send that out to the council to take a look at. Or can we do that?
I
Between
mean, if we want to get into I guess I will support whatever, and I'll be happy to write whatever, but I've just been involved in a few exercises where it's been committee by whatever. I think if people entrust Shelley and I to add the personal flavor of Glenwood Springs and to not make it overtly political or inflammatory, if you trust us, let us run with it, and we will get you a copy of what we did. But open it up for revisions. This is going to be a week-long process. I'm sorry.
So, and not my motion. My motion is that we appoint 2 people. We trust them to be the voice of council. They're knowledgeable about this, and we move it on.
Paula?
I would just ask that Carl take a look at it, or Deborah, or somebody that says, yeah, this is going to fit within the realm of what we need to say.
Yeah.
We'll get the parents' blessing. So,
Thank you.
all right. We have a motion by Ingrid, a second by Shelley. All in favor, say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? All right. It looks like Councilor Hershey's opposed. Motion carries 6-1. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dita. Charlie, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that we direct planning and zoning to look at adopting regulations or legislation and make a recommendation to us under House Bill 74-1041, and to give that some priority. I think that's an important consideration that we should be looking at, not only for this, but for other potential projects. And so I would make that motion that we direct them to look at that and make a recommendation to us on adopting appropriate guidelines.
I'll second Charlie.
I think Ingrid had that second. I heard a couple of voices. So I'll give it to Charlie. I'll give Ingrid the second. Questions, comments on the motion? Okay. Ryan, let's call the question.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Mayor Godis,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Willman,
Yes.
Counselor Stepp,
Yes.
Counselor Kaup,
yes.
Counselor Russo,
Yes.
Counselor Hershey. It passes 6-1.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Dita. Thank you, Charlie, for that motion. We'll move on to item number 14, citizen petition on noise reduction. I am going to bring on over the famous Mr. Rob Miller. I think I'm bringing him over. Hold on. Robin, are you able to unmute yourself?
That's what retirement will do to you. You just get out of practice.
Robin, you're not on Zoom meetings every day anymore? I'll tell you what, we'll give Robin another minute and then we can move on to the next item. And if Robin, oh, there we go. I wasn't going to eliminate you, Robin. I was just going to skip you until you figured it out. Sorry. We're good now.
I apologize for the technology glitch.
No problem.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank council for allowing me some time to bring this item forward. I'm sure you guys are all very familiar with the situation that I've tried to address. Highway 82 is right out our backyard, as it is with all these subdivisions from Bellevue Farm down to the Stiers subdivision by the cemetery. I don't know if it's a factor of I'm home a lot now, but certainly the noise level that I'm hearing from the highway is increasing all the time. Trucks are using jake brakes. People are speeding like crazy. I went door to door with to these 3 subdivisions, trying to gather some support. I had talked to Terry Parch last year, and she had suggested to me that I do a petition and I make a presentation to City Council. So that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I guess what I want from City Council is potentially some direction to city staff to reach out to CDOT and work cooperatively and see if something can be done to mitigate the noise and the associated air pollution. The highway is a very busy highway, and it was here when we bought our home. But when this subdivision was platted, Highway 82 was on the South Grand Avenue alignment. It was moved to its current alignment in the 1960s. Unfortunately, that highway is elevated considerably over these adjacent properties. From the middle of my backyard to the westerly line of Highway 82, it's about 11 feet higher than my house. So as you know, when sound propagates off of the source, it's radial. So we get bombarded with all the noise, whether it's trucks accelerating, whether it's truck drivers applying jake brakes, even though there's ordinance and signing here in the community to prohibit that, it happens on a pretty routine basis. So that's the gist of my presentation. I put some information together in the packet. I think there is a possibility for the city to work with CDOT and maybe build a sound wall or build a sound wall and reduce the speed limit. I know that has negative connotations in a number of ways. We're trying to get people through town in a hurry, but if people are doing 50, 60 miles an hour behind my house, and then the light at McDonald's turns red, and there's a lot of brakes being applied, a lot of downshifting, and a lot of jake brakes being applied. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that any of you might have regarding the information I put in the packet or anything else.
Robin, I didn't see, I would probably not ask this of a normal neighborhood petitioner. But given your somewhat familiarity, is there, and maybe it's not fair to ask you, we should possibly ask our city engineer, but is there a ballpark figure on the cost of something like this?
I know CDOT is building a lot of sound walls on the I-25 project, and they produce a cost summary every year for those types of things. So I'm sure that information is pretty easily to gain.
Okay.
And I'm more than happy to do some of the legwork.
Just do the fundraising. That's all.
I couldn't even get people to answer the door.
Counselor Stepp.
So maybe my question is more towards Deborah or even Matt, but Deborah, I've driven into other towns where there's noise ordinance rules before you hit town limits. And this is in our town limits. Do we have that on the highway of not, noise reduction, not applying, Jake brakes, that kind of thing, that so people are aware of what's the whole process there? Can we ticket them? Can we, where are we at? And how far out does our police, town police actually patrol out on Highway 82?
I believe they patrol out to the end of city limits on Highway 82. I mean, the general problem with enforcement is, I think, as Robin pointed out in his petition, is it's hard to do right now. We're down so many officers. I know we have lots of potential officers in the queue now, which is good, but I mean, still, real active traffic enforcement is difficult for us. I believe we do have Jake braking regulations. I could be getting that confused with another city. But once again, that comes down to noise enforcement. Someone's got to be able to enforce it.
And so along that same line of kind of thinking, how we could possibly, and this isn't just, Robin's neighborhood. We are now looking at, Glen Avenue and all of that. We're looking at bringing in REI. We've got all of this stuff kind of going on. How do we work with CDOT to say we're transitioning to this is more city neighborhood than being on a highway? I mean, is there an opportunity there in the next year, the next couple of years that we can start going, this needs to be a lower speed limit? And I saw the email, and thank you very much for reaching out to CDOT, but I don't feel like we're quite on a highway there anymore that far out of town, or we won't be pretty soon. We've got another, we've got Bell Rippey going in, another residential area. I'm just trying to see how do you work, and maybe Carl knows this too, start looking at defining speed limits within what city limit?
What CDOT said today is, I think if you ask them to, they're willing to look at it, but they also said, depending on the results, we might not be happy with what they come back with, right? So, the formula, and Terry can explain the formula better than I can, but, their fear would be if they follow their process, the speed limit doesn't get reduced, it might get increased.
And I saw that, but I'm just kind of concerned that we're really not looking at the bigger picture of, we've expanded as a town, we are growing, and, using that argument that, well, we're just going to base it on, what the average speed limit is. If we could do that, people would do it. We go down Grand Avenue from 8th to 23rd, and it's 40 miles an hour.
Well, and that is one of the reasons why we have not done that on Grand Avenue through the middle of town, because keep in mind that this is a state highway over which we have no actual jurisdiction. So we can make requests on what CDOT will do, and they have very specific process for determining speed limits. Unfortunately for us and for most communities, that results in a negative outcome. You go the wrong direction. And whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, and Robin will know this from years of us trying to deal with Grand Avenue too, it's frustrating, but it's not something we have really any real control over, other than trying to work cooperatively with CDOT on and frankly avoiding the speed studies, because they don't really help. But there are other, and that's where Terry's relationship being great with CDOT is a really good thing. So, but just keep in mind, we can't force anything on State Highway.
And that's not what I was saying. I was just hoping we could open a door. We negotiated to get it 25 miles an hour through the downtown area, and maybe that needs to start looking at being considered extending further down the road. And believe me, I commuted many years going to Carbondale, and I have seen that rise in traffic. I can't believe I actually used to bike commute on that road, which I would never do anymore. Thank you for the Rio Grande Trail. Well, I would love for us to be able to explore some opportunities, and Terry, I don't know, and that's more of a comment, and I know we're asking questions now, so I'll let others ask questions.
Yeah, I don't want to see us do a speed study because it looks like, as you have mentioned, it could come back and be negative. I know we've had other complaints about speed at Grand Avenue. Ms. Kane often lets us know her frustration with the speed, and I sure do understand that frustration. And I know she doesn't understand, or I shouldn't say no, but I think she wishes we could do more than we were actually able to do. However, because I think we have a good relationship with CDOT, I would hope that staff would use whatever influence we can to try to convince them that within the city of Glenwood Springs, the speeds on Highway 82 through Glenwood Springs should be no more than 25. And that would take us out to the city limits. You're still gonna have people speeding up, but hopefully that gets them past those neighborhoods in South Glenwood. It helps with the noise somewhat. And also we should look at I assume that we can, but I don't know. Can we say to CDOT that we don't want to have anybody use jack brakes within the city limits, which would help a little bit with the noise issues as well. And Robin, I think you know limitations of budget. We don't have the money to build a wall, and I know you know that. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention and all the work you've done. But I don't think that's a practical remedy here, but either from us or from CDOT. But the speed limit seems like something that we may be able to work cooperatively with CDOT to get there. And as much as we can do without getting into a formal speed study, I would encourage us to do.
I'll just jump in real quick. I'm hesitant of the unintended consequences. I see Terry's hand up, so I'll say something stupid and she can correct me on it. But I think that a potential, I live and use the 27th Street, Grand Avenue intersection all the time. And that intersection, even with a dedicated right turn lane, you get up to 35 miles fairly quickly. So it's 25 miles up to that 27th Street. You have another couple hundred yards or half mile, maybe at 35. And then towards the end of town, it graduates up to 45. I just worry that if we bring that down to 25 all the way out to city limits, which, yes, there might be an REI going in, but there's also not American Furniture and there hasn't been like large growth out there, that you would start to see traffic back up and it would then congest the 27th Street intersection.
Jonathan, it's at 45 at 27th Street. You're allowed to go up to 45 right after 27th.
Okay, well, yeah, so then I think that is even more to the point of if we don't release that traffic to get at a speed that's been determined at least safe for traffic, maybe not for noise, but for traffic, I see that traffic backs up. It's not as bad now that there's a roundabout instead of a stoplight on South Grand and 27th Street. But I just worry that you could start backing up that roundabout. You could start backing up over the 27th Street bridge if you start congesting traffic by not allowing them to release. So I don't know about sound. I just know about, cars and trucks getting off and being able to get up to speed does alleviate a lot of the congestion that is all coming out of South Glenwood in the 4-mile corridor that is heading up Valley. But I'd love to hear Terry tell me I'm completely wrong or vindicate me totally. Either one.
I think in terms of congestion and backup of traffic, it does help to have a boundary condition where we kind of allow them to move out faster, and it is true that, I think particularly in the morning hours, our biggest movement is to the south. So I would imagine to some extent you're correct. So there you go. Nice job, Jonathan. But I would also say that, CDOT, they, I think, work pretty cooperatively with us. If we ask them to lower the speed limit, to a certain point on State Highway 82, they may consider it. We'd have to go through operations. But what I would say is that, anybody who travels Grand Avenue today, where we have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, knows that most people travel, somewhere between, I'd say 33 and probably 37. It's because they feel comfortable traveling that speed. That highway is wide enough and there's not enough friction on the sides, and it makes you think that you're comfortable at that speed. So without some sort of a structural control on the highway, to whatever point we wanted to try to enforce a speed limit like that, we're creating a condition where Chief Darris is going to be spending a lot of time responding to complaints. That we either have to have the staff to to put out there to enforce the speed limit, or we have to live with the complaints. I think everybody's familiar with Miss Kane and her complaints over time, and she might be right. We can't put that many people out there to sit out there all day to enforce the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I do think that the idea of putting the signs is one thing, but then you've got to have the enforcement to back it up, or you need to somehow make the highway feel like it should be driven at 25 miles an hour.
Thanks, Terry. Great answer.
Yeah, I was just going to add, CDOT has the petition. They are, looking at it internally. There is not a very good chance that they will agree to pay for a sound wall. They usually only do those when they're building the highway. And I would just say, if you guys vote to give me direction to talk to CDOT about lowering the speed limit, just bear in mind how much political capital we want to spend on this. And it could be you want me to run at this full blast, but also remember we only have so much political capital. So just bear that in mind, and I'm happy to do whatever council wants to do.
Charlie, then Shelley.
I'll be real brief. I don't want to belabor this. And Deborah, I'm not asking you to use that political capital. I'm just asking you to make some phone calls and say this is a major concern, and anything you can do to help us out, we appreciate. We have too much else going on with CDOT and Southbridge and everything else, that this is not a place. As much as I would like to see us do something about this, that we should use that political capital. And I would note the response to Terry, and I agree with Terry about the width of the road and stuff, but asking maybe the state patrol sometimes to sit out there in the morning, and all I can do is sit by the side of the road, and those people will go the speed limit until they get past the state patrol car. So, I mean, it isn't just us, it is a state highway. So that might be another place we could ask for some assistance.
Thanks, Charlie. Shelley.
I have a question on, do we have any safety data down south of the intersection with Blake and Highway 82 there? Because there has been quite a bit of development, and I'm speaking to Paula's comments about, the city has expanded, and we have the new, the Glenwood rafting shop and facility is down there now. Again, we've always had Doll Plumbing, but now the other commercial structures and storage structures that are down south of there. I'm just wondering, it's difficult to turn across that traffic in and out of there. So I don't know if we have any safety data down there.
Paula, I'm sure that I could ask. Chief Darris keeps all of our accident data, and if the council were interested, I could try to collect that for the last 5 years and bring you back what's occurred, if there are any trends over that time.
Okay, I'm just wondering if that could help us with the speed issue, because I'm also noticing when I drive South Glen, there's more pedestrians now. It's just more development, more business down there. I think with the new apartments going in, we're going to have more pedestrians walking along that South Glen Avenue there. And I think we might have multiple reasons, even beyond sound. And I really thank you, Robin, for bringing this to us. It's well presented and well thought out, but I think if we can, there are other reasons there to make a case for lowering the speed limit, and along with the sound. And so I think if we could pursue that avenue, because it wasn't that long ago that we used to have 35 miles an hour, even north of 23rd Street on the section of Grand Avenue there. And we were able to successfully get CDOT to lower that down to 25. I don't know if Robin, you remember that. It used to be 25 miles an hour if you were going north, but if you were going south, I think it was 35, starting after like 14th or somewhere in there. And they agreed to lower it just to keep with that consistency. And we kind of have the same thing. We have 35 miles an hour heading north from, I think, that Blake intersection, maybe a little bit south of there. But, and then we've got that increasing speed going going south. And I think, as Robin pointed out, it creates that situation where you have all these people speeding up to head south out of town. And if that light turns at Blake, then they're using Jake brakes and other methods to stop fairly quickly. So I think there's a case to take the speed limits out, say to the Rosebud Cemetery at least, and get people out of town before they're really accelerating up to 50 miles an hour. So that's my comment. And I think it would be worth working too. But I also like your ideas, Terry, on doing the physical, call it traffic calming. I don't know if we can do that on the highway, but that's another thing that we'd have to come up with budget and get CDOT to build. So that's a great idea too, but it might be a longer term solution.
It would be a request to them for sure.
Councilor Davis.
There we go. Well, I agree with Shelley. I'd really be interested in understanding the stats a little better of accidents that have occurred out south of 27th Street. It seems to me that speed limit creates a really dangerous situation. That Walmart intersection is terrifying. Getting in and out of Ken Murphy's place is really difficult. I often go to Napa, and the way their parking lot works is you drive in, but you back out onto 82 right there, and it's really, really difficult to do. I would certainly support a friendly suggestion to CDOT to lower that. I don't think 25 is reasonable, but 35 as you leave 27th Street to increase speed would be seemed like to me would be a reasonable request. And so there I am. I can't imagine how we could ever get a sound wall built. You see them all over Denver. They've been real successful with that as they've built new highways. But I understand that until CDOT is looking for some compromise from folks, that's probably not going to happen.
Thanks, Steve. I have some strong opinions that are probably as important as Matt Langhorse's and Terry Parch's, but instead I'll just let them talk. Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, I have to chime in. It's just the way I am. The CDOT never changed the speed limit going northbound. It's 45 miles an hour before Prince Creek or Glenwood Commercial, whatever you want to call it there. The deceleration lane going into Glenwood Commercial is probably shorter than it should be at 45 miles an hour. But right in front of Dahl, they put it back to 35 because there's so many accesses along there. Exactly what Steve was saying and Paula was talking about. There's so many accesses along there that have almost no sight distance back because of fences or whatever the conditions are. It seems like it would make sense for them to remove the 45 and put it back all the way perpendicular or to the 35 mile an hour zone and just say everything from here back to 27th Street's at least 35. And then from there on, it goes down to 25 because you come into many, many, many accesses along the highway corridor there. So I know why they did it. They want to get people out of town a little bit faster, but those accesses still make left-hand turns, not just right-hand turns. Yes, you have to accelerate. That's why it's 35. You got to get up to speed before somebody rear ends you kind of thing. And there's no acceleration lanes there anymore because they're now bus lanes, but you still have to make a transition across 5 lanes of traffic with traffic coming at you at 45 miles an hour. So why they changed it in the first place, I kind of understand how they did it and not really improving anything out there while they did it. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, in retrospect, having that 2020 view looking back at it. So that's my 2 cents is they should at least parallel each other, 35 starting here, 35 ending here. And that would put them at about the Rosebud Cemetery area where we've been kind of talking about. And I believe that's basically where it was before they made the changes. So my 2 cents, and I'll be quiet.
I want to mention something that we haven't talked about in a while, but back in 2013, the city developed an access control plan with the state. Part of the purpose with the access control plan was to improve the safety along the corridor. The state is also concerned about, the number of accesses on the highway as well as those turning movements across the highway. There's a series of conditions, when a property develops along the corridor that we have to enforce to have them consolidate accesses. But in the agreements for the access control plan, there is a condition where either the city or the state would initiate a process to place a median in the middle of State Highway 82. There would be turn lanes at our major streets. But a lot of those properties, those driveways would become right in, right out. If we were to do that, it would lower speeds through town with the physical barrier. It would also improve the safety of the highway corridor, keeping people from, I visit Starbucks almost every morning and trying to make that left-hand turn to go back towards City Hall, very dangerous. There is a possible solution that we've already agreed to, but I think, trying to do something like that is obviously a big project and would be expensive. One thing to say also about the noise wall, we're considering a noise wall out on the Southbridge project right now. And there are some cheaper ways to do it. I was just looking to see if I could isolate the cost for the noise wall in our current estimate, and I don't see it immediately, but I can bring that back to the council. The structure that we're considering right now is just a series of piers with panels in it, and it's probably the lowest cost version that we could build. If the council's interested in that cost, I can bring that back.
Go ahead, Ingrid.
I guess what I'm having a hard time ascertaining here is, are we trying to come up with the solution here, or are we saying this is enough of a concern that we're not really in a position to put money into a sound wall, but maybe we could direct staff to just look at some alternatives and or start a dialogue with CDOT to look at reducing speeds or doing something so that we, at least the Jake brake concept, they weren't either slowing down or speeding up right adjacent to the subdivision. And is that what we're looking for?
I think it's a great question. Go ahead, Paula.
I think what I was going to propose is that we do have city staff, as Charlie said, just inquire, say what can we do to lower this speed limit to what Matt was saying, 35 in both directions till you get to the end of the city limits because of the access to businesses, safety to pedestrians. Let's open the conversation. And Deborah already has, she did it when I was asking her questions and brought it to CDOT. So they're aware of it. They have the petition, but I'm saying, let's just move a little bit further and see what are some potential solutions and how can we work with CDOT, work with the state patrol, work with various people to kind of mitigate that higher speed as you leave town, and hopefully get it to within a realm of that's reasonable within a city limit next to businesses and next to residences. Thank you, Robin, for bringing this to our attention. And I think that's part of it, is we put up with things until somebody says, hey, this is going on. So that's our responsibility, I think, as a council. And I hope that using that responsibility, we can at least push to inquire a little further than what we've done so far.
So to move this along, it seems like there's general consensus around having Deborah make an inquiry to CDOT. Not a full-fledged, full-throated, I don't want to misinterpret here, expend political capital, run at it like a matador, a bullet towards a matador, but I think making a call and just seeing if they'd be willing to have the conversation. If they are, great. At that point, I think if they're willing to have that conversation, I would also like to suggest that Terry conduct a traffic study on some of the side streets so that we know what some of the downflow impacts will be to specifically the 27th Street intersection. Because I think until we know that, we don't want to make a change that is going to negatively impact things. So I don't know if I summarized that well enough. I see a couple of hands up, so apparently I didn't. Go ahead, Ingrid, and then Shelley.
I just wanted to maybe tighten it up a little bit and say that we are going to request that council start an active dialogue with CDOT to look for kind of those low-hanging fruits and or low-cost initiatives that will maybe result in some success in reducing traffic impacts, speed, etc., in that corridor. Period. Little punctuation.
And along with that, I would be interested in that low cost wall, just to know what that pricing was that Terry had mentioned.
Now I'd be interested in knowing that as well. And additionally, if we're going to be doing a wall there, I would very much be interested in re-examining the Park West wall to protect those residents from the traffic that's on South Midland that this council said we weren't going to do. So I don't see any difference between those two. It's traffic, it's neighbors. I was just looking for a visual wall, not a sound wall, but I think if we're going to open this door to providing sound or visual barriers from citizens to trafficked areas, we need to open that door a little bit wider and look at that sound wall that's on South Grand. That's a good example. Why did those neighbors get protected on South Grand with a sound wall where my neighbors in Park West did not, or Mr. Millard's neighbors in that neighborhood, Sopris 31st and Sopris area-ish. I think there's a lot of areas in our community.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I live a block off of Grand. It's really, really noisy. I lived in a lot of noisy places. If you don't like it, I guess you move. I mean, I don't know what to tell Robin, but it's a CDOT issue, not my issue. And I'm not paying 30 cents for a wall. So thank you.
Thanks, Tony. But I'd be supportive of putting a sound wall up in your neighborhood if we needed to.
Where would you put that wall?
I don't know.
in front of the marijuana store?
For you, Tony, I would try to do it.
Okay, well, it's noisy. I live in a noisy place. I lived in New York City on 1st and 64th. It was super noisy. You know what? Maybe it's only a couple of hours a day from 5 to 7. You get used to it, or maybe, Robin, go to the pool when it's noisy. I don't know what to tell you.
Shelley.
I guess I agree with the general direction that, Paula and kind of Matt suggested, and that we take that to CDOT. I was just going to suggest that, we used to have a kind of a roundtable work session with CDOT every year or every other year. So this might be an item. We have many things that we're working with them on now. Southbridge, the Canyon, the evacuation plan, lots of things going on, but this could be one topic of conversation and I think approaching it, yes, there's the sound and the speed issue, but that all ties in, I think, to a safety issue, which might elevate it to something that they'd be willing to talk about.
Okay, it sounds like we have direction. Deborah, do you feel like you have tentative direction, and if you need more
Vote
clarity?
motion, please.
Okay.
I just want to always get in the habit of doing that, if you guys don't mind.
I'll give it a crack. I think I heard that we are going to try to engage. We are going to make a call and try to engage CDOT on the possibility of lowering the speed limits in that corridor, the 82 corridor, until the end of city limits. And as well, to incorporate Councilor Wusso's comments, if there are other low-hanging, I don't want to say cheap fruits, but I guess cheap fruits, non-organic fruits that we're able to also engage CDOT in pursuit of lower speeds and less sound, that we open the door for those things.
I'll second that. If you, rather than the we, collective we, as we're asking staff to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Motion is amended, certainly.
Okay.
I meant we as a team, but what I really meant was staff. It's been moved by myself, Jonathan Godes, seconded by Shelley Kopp. Further discussion? Seeing none, let's call the question. Ryan?
I love to be able to put organic fruit in the minutes, so thank you. Counselor Kaup,
Yes.
Counselor Hershey,
No.
Counselor Russo,
Yes.
Mayor Godes,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman,
No.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Stepp.
Yes.
It passes 5-2.
All right. Robin, thank you very much.
All right, thank you guys.
And hey, just while you're here, because we probably didn't thank you enough, thanks for 40 plus years of serving the city with amazing distinction. You couldn't get away without us humiliating you. We knew you'd be back.
It was 34 years, not 40.
34 years. All right.
We miss you.
Thank you
See
sincerely.
you.
I miss you guys too.
All right. Have a good night, Robin. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda, direction on requests for proposals for South Canyon. Who do I need to bring over?
I believe Mike Hughes is an attendee. I'd bring him over. And then I would also bring over Brian. And maybe Bree.
Look out. All right. Okay, I think I've done everybody.
How about Becky Blair, Mr. Mayor? Why is her hand up? Does she
I
need
don't
to?
know.
Oh, okay. Just curious. Excuse me.
Good evening, council. It's good to see Robin again. Usually only see him at some of our special events nowadays. So to jump in with this, last June, council directed staff to conduct a public engagement process on the vision for improvements of the South Canyon Parklands with all the various recreational and natural amenities there, and to bring findings and recommendations back before proceeding with a request for proposal for the development of the hot springs, as well as recreational vehicles and tent camping for the South Canyon area, according to Councilor Davis's motion. I do want to thank Hughes Collaboration, who we contracted with, as well as our Public Information Officer, Brianna Starbuck, and our Long Range Senior Planner, Trent Hyatt, also known as the Long Ranger, for all their assistance with the public process. We collected data and feedback through focus interviews with key stakeholder groups, through a well-attended open house listening session at the community center, and a public survey that was received. We received over 800 responses for it. So real good cross-section of the community. The summary of public process to date and the recommendations for next steps is included in the packet. Staff does recommend implementing the recommendations for next steps in that summary of public process, and defers to council to provide direction and scope for an RFP to develop and improve recreational features in South Canyon, should council still desire to move forward with putting out an RFP at this time. So I'll turn it over to Mike Hughes for a little bit, who will walk us through some of the main takeaways and observations from the public input that we received, and then also share some of the recommendations from the Parks and Recreation Commission.
Great, thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Mike Hughes, Hughes Collaboration. It is advantageous that you are embarking on a comprehensive plan update because a good many of the comments really went well beyond South Canyon to questions of long-term vision and development plan for the entire city. And so comprehensive plan policies that apply citywide will be very useful as you try to make some decisions about South Canyon in particular. So that's really is the first recommendation, is to move forward with those comprehensive plan and policy changes. Then second, to collect a baseline of information about the current conditions in South Canyon. Everything from the coal seam fire to one point of access to wildlife needs. And I won't enumerate the entire list, but you got a great deal of public input about all of the questions. Third, to create some images for possible future scenarios that align with the comprehensive plan and are responsive to that data collection. And then finally, to make your decisions about the future direction of South Canyon through the development of a management plan. And some of the elements of that management plan, the health of the water system, an assessment of historic sites, evaluation of wildlife habitat, maintenance questions, trails, gun range and archery range, development of camping sites, and the hot springs. So again, Brian, thanks for pulling up the slides. Again, comprehensive plan, baseline of information, future scenarios, and then to decisions about South Canyon. So, again, a really extensive public input, and I just want to give my compliments to the staff. They did a great job in rounding up the right stakeholders and really creating a great opportunity for public comment and input.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple questions. Charlie, go ahead.
So Mike, I read your report and you and I had a conversation about this at one point. Read page 1 of your report, your recommendation is that, I'm going to put in my words, not yours, we leave this issue alone as a council and let and you just kind of said it again, let the comprehensive plan process unfold this. Is that your general overall recommendation?
Yeah, I think one of the observations I had really in reflecting back over much of the public comment is that the comment had a great deal to do with the future of your town and not so much about South Canyon in particular. So there's a lot of input that I received and we're passing along to you that had to do with growth and development for your entire community. And it was sort of lobbed onto South Canyon. So people who think you need more housing want more housing there. And people who think that the whole community has enough housing say, don't build any housing there. And so it took a while for me to really sort through that distinction. But there are a great many people who had lots to say about the future of the city, and they just showed up at the South Canyon meeting and made those comments, but they really apply to the entire vision of the city and really belong more in the comprehensive plan.
Thanks, Mike.
Mm-hmm. Councilor Hershey.
Mike, could you talk a little bit about the gun range issues? I've had a number of concerns and I've shot there, and how it would be affected or what you think about that. Thanks.
Yeah. So I think there are two things that are important there. First, with respect to lots of uses, gun range and many others, there's a really interesting set of adjacencies that the management plan needs to consider. An archery range next to a gun range, next to a landfill, next to bike trails, and what belongs next to what. And so certainly that is true for the gun range, but it's true for lots of things. In particular with the gun range, there's a lot of affection for that facility, and for many of its users, real hope that it can stay. That if you don't have it, that they have very few other options, certainly very few nearby. But that was true for lots of the uses. That there are groups who are committed to and attached to those uses, who like the convenience of being able to get that activity at South Canyon, and who would be unhappy to see it moved or removed. And certainly there was a great deal of support for South Canyon as a place that is ideal for something like the gun range.
Follow.
Similar to your last comment, Mike, can you comment, like when I read through the comments on the hippie pots, I kind of felt like that wide range also of don't do anything, do something. Can you tell me what you're thinking that you saw in that?
Yeah, so I think that there are people who've done a great deal of work on a bike trail plan, for example, and so they come with that single focus and want you to do a great deal more on bike trails. And so and that's true for so many of the particular interest groups that showed up. Historic preservation, there are people who really want you to assess the historic resources there and do something to protect them. So it's kind of this single issue focus. And that often leads people to say, then the other things that may not be compatible with that, you should stop those things or make those things go away or do less of those things. And so for me, one of the interesting elements of a management plan is that you have so many of these individual and particular activities, and you have to really figure out what is compatible with what, and how much buffer you need between a gun range and a bike trail, to really make those things both effective and safe for one another. The same is true with the landfill. How much do you want to be in a hot springs when you can smell the landfill over the hill? So I think it's those adjacencies that are really the most interesting piece of this. And behind that, you have individuals who like their thing and want you to keep doing their thing, and are perfectly fine if you squeeze out some things that aren't their thing. But it'll be hard to have all of them, particularly given the risks of coal seam fires and the buffers you need to create around those areas. Again, the access one way in and one way out, and the concern of wildfire and basic health and safety. So it's quite a puzzle, and I think the data can take you a long way in understanding those adjacencies and seeing what really cannot be compatible with what.
Right. Thank you.
So once again, I want to just say thank you so much, Mike. You have come into our community and you have very kindly and thoroughly understood all these different shareholders, like everybody who, or I think we call them stakeholders in this industry, who have, a passion about this, including all of us as well. You're like the community family counselor. You know all our issues. And so with that in mind, I see two very, very distinctly needed items as we move forward. One is we're already working on a comp plan, and that we're 10 months approximately out. In addition, we have now heard from multiple groups, but one being the Parks and Rec Commission, which to me, holds a lot of weight in how we move forward. How do we take these two necessary elements and how do we integrate them timing wise? Just as a recommendation, we won't hold you to it. But ultimately, and I think it's really important for the public to hear this, is that you made a recommendation that we, communities leaders, including advocates from every perspective and stakeholders from every part of the city, need to come together in order to move beyond some kind of unsavory and unhelpful behavior. And we need to come up with a long-term shared vision and a comp plan and policies that apply citywide. And I just think we're going to have a hard time knowing when to put these pieces together. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so my hunch, and it's only that, is that some of the data collection to fill in the gaps around South Canyon can dovetail with and not interfere with your really moving as briskly as you can possibly move on the comp plan, and then asking yourselves, how do those citywide or townwide ideas apply in this particular place, which is loved.
It is.
You know, so many people came up to me and say, I love this about South Canyon, or isn't it beautiful? Or isn't this an extraordinary place for, you know, this natural resource to exist. And so I think to move out on the comp plan as briskly as you can and do the data collection particular to South Canyon and to have those things dovetail together. Never perfect. Those timing, that kind of timing is never ideal, but I think I don't think there are immediate, we have to do something right now in South Canyon.
Sure.
That would make you want to move out in front of the comp plan. Ultimately.
Great. So what I'm hearing is, knowing we have 10 months on a comp plan, if we were to start, say, late summer, early fall with a master plan for South Canyon, after we've gotten more feedback and kind of data collection, that timing might work well together. And that's just, once again, I'm only asking for just your perspective, because I do think that sometimes our best direction comes from those who understand it, but are removed from it, a third party, which is exactly what you are.
Yeah. And I think much of that depends on resources, how many staff hours you will have to apply to these things, or how many, just what sort of resources you have available to you to dive into the management plan. And so I think ultimately it's how stretched your own resources, particularly the staff resources, are to be multitasking on that place while you're also doing the whole place.
Sure. And then I have one last question, and that is, knowing the climate, knowing the passion for what is out in South Canyon, can you see any future success if we just choose to omit a master plan? If we choose not to kind of dig in deep and say, what does the community as a whole want? And just say, council feels like we should do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So I think if you were not in the midst of a comp plan, or your timing of that wasn't really going to dovetail with some of this, I think for me, given the physical realities and risks and resources there, historic resources, the coal seam fire, again, one way in and out, some of those, I think if you simply looked hard at the constraints and the way to protect those or enhance those resources, including the ones that are human made, the gun range and the archery range and the bike trails. I think if you put all those constraints together and figured out, again, the adjacencies, what fits with what works well with what, you could probably come up with, it would self-limit, is my hunch. There wouldn't be a wide array of choices that you could make to do just anything and everything. So it would narrow you pretty tightly. But it's nice to have that additional layer of how does this fit into the comprehensive vision for the city.
So you're saying, as a strong recommendation, just in your understanding of how all these pieces work together, having a master plan completed out there is a very beneficial piece in understanding the complexities of everything.
Right. Because I do think that can tell you how much use to make of South Canyon.
Yeah.
And how much you would want to put resources into solving some of those problems. So do you want to do coal seam fire mitigation so that more land is accessible to you to do something? Do you really want to spend a good deal of money to solve the one way in and one way out transportation problem? Because that is a big investment. And if your view of the city's future is that we want more, and we want to accommodate more of the people who really want to live where you live because it's pretty great, then I think that would take you in the direction of trying to figure out what kinds of resource investments you're prepared to make to have that. If it is a smaller, quieter, slower, less, then some of those constraints are things you simply can rejoice in, or let constrain you and not try to push beyond them.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you so much. Thank you for that candid response too, because I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I did feel like you have a pretty good understanding of how all these pieces are working together.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
So, I think this process, we had a lot of public process, a lot of public engagement. We reached out, we heard from a lot of folks. I'm ready to make a recommendation that we follow staff recommendation, which is to implement the recommendations for next steps contained in the summary of public process. I don't know if that's enough of a motion, but
Are we on, can I ask a question of just procedure here? Are we taking any public comment on this tonight? I thought we were still in questions.
no. Well, this isn't an ordinance, so I didn't know we were taking public comment.
Okay.
I thought this was a presentation and we were giving direction. So that's why I made the motion.
And Mr. Mayor, just for clarification for the public who might not have seen or read through that in the packet, it pretty much follows the recommendation of the Parks and Recreation Commission. And I'll just quote this from their letter to council, which was included in the packet. Their recommendation is that staff be authorized and the city appropriate funding to undertake a development management plan in coordination with the Parks and Recreation Commission before we send out an RFP request for development improvements. So that RFP for a management plan would give us a lot of those answers to more questions and provide more detail about some of those factors and talking points that came out of that public information process.
No, wait, are
I
you,
will-
which RFP, Ryan?
Or a management plan.
For a management, not an RFP for a development.
Yeah, the
Okay.
recommendation is to do the
Yeah.
management plan first, and then let that inform the scope of an RFP for development of improvements.
Yes, and I did read that recommendation. I didn't want there to be confusion in the audience or anywhere about an RFP. Okay.
So for my motion, I'll just be clear to incorporate Brian's additional feedback that it is a management plan we're talking about as per the recommendations of both the Park and Rec Commission and staff.
And I second that motion.
Okay, it's been
Thank
moved
you.
by myself and seconded by Shelley. Is there further comments on the motion? See none, Ryan, let's call the question.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman,
Yes.
Councilor Wusso,
Yes.
Mayor Godus,
Yes.
Councilor Stepp,
Yes.
Councilor Cow,
Yes.
Councilor Hershey,
No.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
It passes 6-1.
All right. It's about this time of night. We usually take a little break. Do we want a break or do we want to try to get through our last 3 items, really? Actually, changing the name of a tourism promotion board isn't a real item, so maybe just 2 items. Do we want to power through or do we want to take a little break? I'm up for suggestions.
I could use a 5-minute break, Mr. Mayor.
Let's take it a 7-minute break. Come back here at 8:10. Okay. Wait one more minute. We'll get everybody else on. Okay, I think we have already. Going back in, item number 16, public improvement fee extension.
Could we bring Steve Schoflick over?
Absolutely. Anybody else?
That's it.
Okay.
And then if you're ready, good evening, Mayor, members of council, Jen Newton, Community Development. I'm here this evening to talk about a public-private partnership that we have been working on for the past 2 years. The city has been working with Glenwood Meadows Metropolitan District number 3 and the shopping center owner at the Meadows toward a public-private partnership plan that can fix and install needed infrastructure. So the request tonight is a letter of support and extension of the public improvement fee through 2040 with a reduction to 1%, which would be effective at the end of the current life of the public improvement fee. The creation of a new IGA that would address reconstruction of streets and other improvements, and then future amendment of that PIF collection agreement at that time. So the public improvement fee that's collected at Glenwood Meadows was established to finance certain public offsite public improvements of the development. And the city is the collecting agent of the PIF, and it doesn't have any fiduciary responsibilities for it. So the current PIF is 1.5%. It's scheduled to expire in December of 2025. And just to talk a little bit about the problem, Glenwood Meadows is an area that shopping center represents about 25% of our sales tax collections each year. And the roadways there are in need of major repair. We also have need for new improvements at the intersection of West Wolshan and Midland Avenues. And the city cannot fund all of those needed improvements at once at this time. So this proposal is for $4 million to be placed in escrow for those city improvements for Wolshan and West Meadows and East Meadows, and then also those improvements to the Midland intersection. So a minimum of $3 million would be dedicated to the improvements within the shopping center, the roadways in the shopping center. It would also go to repayment of new senior debt, an annual payment for maintenance of the roads, which would be $50,000 a year with a 1% increase each year. So over the 19-year period, those payments to the city would total just over $1 million. And then other pieces of this would go to reducing the operating costs, such as snow removal, parking lot repairs, landscaping that's paid by each of the tenants in the shopping center, and then also to retire the outstanding junior debt. So with that, I'm open to, well, actually, let me just say this. I think if Matt Langhorst is on and he could talk a little bit about the roadway and just kind of briefly go over that kind of high level, and then we can turn it over to Steve and he can talk a little bit more and maybe answer some specific questions. And I'll turn it over to Matt.
So obviously the roads out there are failing for multiple reasons. When Lofts phase 3 went in this time and phase 4 go in, they're replacing entire roadway sections. So that takes out pieces and chunks that help us not to have to replace those sections, and they're being built to a proper roadway section. There's some drainage improvements that need to be done out there, a couple inlets added. Some of the islands that are separating decorative islands out there probably need to be removed for easier snow removal, easier drainage functioning. But this money would give us the ability to go out there, remove entire sections of roadway, build them to a proper design section, mill and overlay sections that are still good. They have some cracking in them. Replace a lot of the concrete that's in the middle islands that has kind of started to separate. And then that maintenance money will really help us keep up with all of those crack repairs, because that's kind of the thing that's gotten us on Meadows a little bit, is getting behind on filling these cracks. The second the water goes down the crack between the asphalt and the curb and gutter, that's going to cause settlement because we're not going to rip all the curb and gutter out. We need to maintain what we have. It would be a much, much, much larger project if we had to just basically wipe the slate clean and start over. But I think we can maintain what we have with proper drainage, proper crack maintenance, keeping some of that 50,000 for a few years and do a little less crack maintenance, do overlays, those kinds of fun things. So with the money, we can definitely make some great strides out there to get the roads back to where they need to be, and put forth a little bit of the money to start looking at those improvements at, like Jen said, West Meadows and Midland, because more development comes in, there's got to be more traffic, and it's got to get out of there safely somehow. Is that what you want, Jen?
Thank you. And then Steve, I don't know if you wanted to introduce yourself and maybe just talk a little
I'm
bit.
happy to. Thanks, Jen. And good evening, everybody. I know it's been a long night. I'll keep it brief. As Jen said, I represent the ownership of Glenwood Meadows Shopping Center. And look, just like 20 years ago when we worked with Carl and other members of the staff to bring the project to life, this conversation about the status of the roads, the maintenance of the roads came up, and it's in excess of 2 years that we've been chatting, Jennifer, Deborah, Carl, and myself. How do we come to a place where those roads are well maintained because they are deteriorating and at the end of their useful life? So we're awfully pleased to be able to, I guess, kick off this potential process, because frankly, there's a lot more to it. With your approval here tonight, we still need to engage. The Metro District will be issuing the debt that goes forward, but we still need approval from a number of adjacent landowners, and candidly, some tenants that are within the shopping center as well. The goal here is for it to be a win for everybody. We want roads that are in good shape, that can bring shoppers to the shopping center safely, no accidents, no trips and falls. That's good for our tenant base. I think that's good for the sales tax in the city. And after working with the staff now, as I said, probably for the better part of 2 years, and with actually Matt and his team on, well, what needs to be repaired? What's the cost of those repaired? This is a program we came up with, and we hope you'll consider it seriously.
I have a question. Maybe this is a Carl question. If we did expend this PIF, would we be restricted, like legally speaking, on how to spend that basically $5 million?
Well, the district, I think, that's going to be issuing the debt. I was just looking back at the IGA we have for improvements at Glenwood Meadows with the Metropolitan District. We're going to have to specify where those funds are getting spent. So I think the intent of this is that there would be identified projects that meet the public improvement definition required to do the PIF financing, and that those improvements would be identified out at Meadows. So the answer is it's a negotiation on whether they're restricted, but I can't imagine that anybody would agree to this if they weren't restricted to these roads.
And if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, I'll add, the tenants, et cetera, are all going to want to know, where those things are going as well.
And Steve Boyd, how much, I've asked for this a number of times, I still haven't gotten that number, but maybe it's a moving target. How much will 1 cent at the Meadows with, I think we're at 5 million that they've generated in tax revenue this year, and assuming a regular growth or not, how much will this potential tax raise over the next 15 years total?
Just clarification, Mr. Mayor, this is a private covenant to collect that. It is not, in fact, a tax.
Okay, well, the 1.5% covenant that I pay in addition to the sales tax that I pay right now, how much will that 1% anticipated covenant, or whatever we're calling it, how much will that generate over the next 15 years?
So I don't know, Jonathan, I'd have to do a little bit of math. But generally speaking, the PIF that we're talking about doesn't generate a whole lot of cash for the city of Glenwood Springs.
I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not talking about the city of Glenwood Springs. I'm talking what is 1% of all the sales out there anticipated over the next 15 years? What is the total amount generated by the PIF, the anticipated PIF. I mean, if they anticipate the city getting 5 million, what's the total? I mean, am I not asking this well?
No, so the city earns 3.7% on all of the sales at the Meadows, which is, we get about $5 million a year roughly in that. So, I mean, I have to do the math, but 1% versus 3.7%.
Yeah, I might be able to help you with that, Mr. Mayor. The PIF generation at 1.5% is roughly, it varies year to year, but a little over $2 million. So you can take 2/3 of that. It's somewhere between $1.3 million and $1.5 million or $6 million a year is generated through the PIF.
So about 25 million total would be generated from this 1% PIF. Rough back of the napkin.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't added those up as it grows because we assume it grows at some point year over year, but that's not
right. Assuming no growth. I mean, I think I just did 1.3 times 15. I got around 25 million. So
yeah, I'd say 25 to 28 is it's not a horrible, back of the envelope guess.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, looks like, hold on a sec. Let me get this order right. Shelley, Ingrid, Paula.
Okay, I guess I have questions similarly along the lines of Jonathan. I'm just wondering about transparency here on, so we've had the 1.5% PIF on all Meadows purchases for the last 20 years. And that was intended to help pay for the infrastructure that was put in some of the roadways, and things like that, right? There's still outstanding debt on that, I'm gathering from the
That's correct. And so to be clear, there was debt that was issued and sold, and then whatever was needed left to finish the things like, and I won't have a complete list, the roundabout down by the highway, the Midland, 8th Avenue improvements, et cetera, were funded by the shopping center itself. And they took the debt back. That money has not been repaid.
Okay. I guess I'm just having questions on the concept of, because I get a lot of question in the community is when does that PIF go away? And I think the community is fairly aware that it's slated to go away in 2025. So the concept of, I'm trying to consider extending that without, I'm just not seeing transparency. And I think that's kind of what Jonathan was getting to. I have a question on transparency of the numbers. So
yeah, sorry. I let's keep it to questions. Sorry.
That's my question.
There you go. There we go.
The question is where, on a proposal like this, I guess I understand it may be a private fee, but we're asking our public to pay this, and that we as a public body are being asked to consider extending it. So I would expect to see complete transparency on projections for money going forward for 15 years and where that money is going, to have a concept of if what is being proposed to the city is fair to our community.
I'm not sure if there's a question that I can answer in there.
Kind of a question of is there a point where we will see transparency of those?
I think all those figures have been shared with the city staff.
I thought there was I mean, if you just want to run through, the aggregate numbers, Steve, I think that would be great.
Sure. Well, as you said, the numbers are a little bit variable, but remember there's a few pieces to that. The first is, in order to start, we have to reissue the debt, right? And add to it in the amounts that are going to the city. So right off the bat, there's a new set of loans, senior loans, the top tier loans that are sold to the public that will be used to pay off existing debt, which I'm going to have to look at as being somewhere, I'm going to have to look again, probably $4 or $5 million. And then we add to it another $4 million, which immediately goes into the city's coffers. The first tier of money goes to repay that debt. That's the first piece. The second piece that comes out of this goes to the city. That's the $50,000 a year to help maintain those roads. The next money that comes out of this in this waterfall goes to the tenants to help defray some of their operating costs at a rate of $1 per square foot. So roughly speaking, call it a round number of $350, a little less than $350,000 a year on average. And that goes to lowering, as Jennifer pointed out, things like snow plowing and repairs, things that will make them the cost of operating a little bit lower in the community and a little bit more stable for the shopping center. When all of those have been paid, if there's money left over, that will go to the debt being repaid. And I don't have what that amount is per year, but if we did meet our numbers year after year, I think the total that goes to the tenants is in the order of magnitude of $8.2 million in total. The amount that's going to the city is a little over $5 million. And then I don't know exactly what will come to the other landowners and this junior notes. It could be anywhere from $5 to $8 million.
Okay, and Ms. Sofia, can I ask?
Does that answer your question?
It does somewhat answer my question. I guess I'm a little bit curious. One more follow-up to that is who right now that $350,000 a year for this maintenance and shoveling, who's paying that right now?
So right now the tenants pay all of those costs, 100% of them.
Okay.
What we're looking to do is defray some of those costs because they are, as you can all imagine, quite high up in this region, and they're high everywhere, right? We've seen costs of maintenance of everything go. I'm sure Matt can tell you, war stories of sweeping and plowing. They've gone up everywhere across the state, but they are quite here. So we're trying to provide them as a means to keep those costs low. And candidly, if we don't offer them something, they may not approve this change.
Okay, thank you.
Just real quick on some of that math, I'm sorry to jump in front, but 8 million goes to the tenants, 5 million goes to the city, so that's 13 million. We think that it's 25, 28 million total generated. Where's the remaining 15 million go?
Well, keep in
remember
mind,
this interest.
Yeah, I was gonna say part of that is cost of issuance and interest, which I'm doing some back of the math. Actually, Steve is doing back of the math, Boyd, on that. It's that 10 million up front has to get paid for, right? Like that's not in the coffers now. So that's a borrowing with cost of issuance and annual repayment.
So maybe the better way to answer your question, Mr. Mayor, is on day one, there's $10 million plus of debt. That has to get repaid.
It has to.
First.
Because that's 5 of that is us.
Right, I get where our 5 is.
But there's existing debt. It's not, we're refinancing the existing debt that has been sold to banks and to the public. So there's maybe this will help clarify. The bond offerings that started 20 years ago were sold to financial institutions. There's an outstanding balance on that as well. So when we go out to refinance all of this, which is the means to provide money to the city, we still have to repay the amount of that loan or roll it into a new loan. So on day one, to help you maybe clarify the math more, there's $10 million day one that's outstanding in debt that needs to be repaid. There's interest that needs to be paid on that debt over the 15, 20 years of that debt being outstanding. So that's not 5 plus 8. Then there's $8 million that goes to the tenants. That's going to get you much closer to the 25 that you're thinking about. 10 plus interest, and I don't know the interest off the top of my head, I apologize. 8 or so over to tenants, and then whatever is left over flowing to the landowners. Again, that's where I'm going. Is it 6? Is it 7? Depends on sales collections. If we have another COVID, it's 4. I don't know.
Okay, thanks. Paula, then Charlie.
No, I think you skipped me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I lowered your hand in anticipation.
Yeah.
Sorry,
That's
go
okay.
ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So really quickly, I have other questions, but you just said if we have another COVID, we drop. But but our numbers actually indicated that during COVID, for that region and the businesses you have, you're actually higher there. Steve Boyd, did anybody want to confirm that?
Well, I can look at, well, I don't have the numbers. 2021 was added because we added more taxable entities. So if I look at individual tenants, you know, some of them are just flat out closed. So it's a little bit hard for me without a lot more detail in front of me to be able to respond. But I think what I'm trying to suggest is broadly, you know, there are hiccups along the way. That what that means is the bottom of that waterfall of flows is the one that gets shut off first. Debt has to be paid first.
Yeah.
It just kind of works its way down. So I'm using more broadly speaking, it's a 15-year period, and I've not through my career gone through 15 years where there isn't something that happens in the environment that affects our retailers.
So my question, and I can, at brick and mortar stores, I think we're in precarious times. I can completely understand, you know, your apprehension to say, you know, with confidence, this will absolutely be the case. Your projections, are you anticipating having the debt be completely paid off in the event that we extend this? Do you plan, or your projections to say the junior debt will be gone at the end of this? Or is this something that you guys just anticipate carrying into perpetuity?
So it's a very good question, and I want to again clarify. So there's senior debt, which is sold. Senior debt must be repaid. Right. So that is a document that has enough cushion to it that it will be for sure repaid. What we believe is that if we hit our projections, which again are a little bit iffy, but it's the best that we can do at the moment, half of the outstanding debt will be repaid.
Half. Okay. And then this is not
without
necessarily
interest.
Okay. So this is kind of a question for staff and Steve. In the event that we don't extend this PIF and the roads deteriorate, who's going to be paying for that? I think this is a question that I think I have the answer, but I'd like to just have a lot of clarity right now in this dialogue.
I would say, Ingrid, we will be paying for the roads. They are our roads.
Yep. Yeah. So in the event that we don't have this done, once again, Matt, will you just give us that quick reminder of, you know, 2 million to get kind of fix it, if I remember right, versus, can you kind of firm up those numbers again for us?
So I've had a few different fix-it plans.
Yeah.
You know, this current fix-it plan is somewhere between $3 and $4 million. I think Steve's seen this number. And we're doing some of that this year. We're throwing concrete in. We did some fixes last year. The lofts did some fixes, you know, but there's more substantial things that need to be done out there. There's some underground water situations that we need to deal with that are causing sinking next to the box culverts, you know. So we're talking probably in the 2 to 3 is what we're looking at right now. Could be on the top of $4 million to kind of put it back together. It's not the wipe the slate clean procedure, but it's get it back to where we can maintain it. It'll get us another 20 or 30 years. So, and then at that point, we just start maintaining it better than we have been in the past. And that's kind of where we're at this moment. So it's just money we don't have, or money that will defer from other infrastructure projects like the Red Mountains, the North Glenwoods, the whatever. It'll have to defer it over to this location because this is an income producing property and we don't want it falling to pieces. Obviously.
Sure. Okay. And so this is a question, this is not a statement. And for those who maybe have this data, please firm it up. But I would assume that based on other areas within the community, like exempting City Market, maybe in other places, this location, this commerce area, the tax that we generate is paid, a good portion of it is paid by those who don't live in our community, those who commute down from Aspen, those who come up from Rifle. Is that a pretty safe assumption?
We are a regional shopping hub. So yes, I would assume, I don't think we know what the real breakdown is, but we do know we are supported by a much larger group than the city.
Okay. And so while the rest of the city streets, the subdivisions, all of those variables, that the onus on fixing those inherently belongs to us and our tax revenue, but by continuing this PIF, it's fair to say that those who shop there from other communities would be helping us keep the roads that they're using satisfied and in good condition without us actually having to incur that money. And then that money could be used for subdivisions like Red Mountain. Is that another pretty safe assumption?
I would say that is a way you can look at it. Yes.
Okay, awesome.
So, real quick, sorry to interrupt, but could I mean, Ingrid, to that point, couldn't we also look at the Roaring Fork Marketplace and all the car sales? I mean, can you say that about any, unless I'm missing something, can you say about literally all of our retail and restaurants in our community?
You can, except I don't have the option to use a PIF to pay for those.
Well, I don't, that's actually, can I just real quick ask, do we have the option to put a PIF on the Roaring Fork Marketplace? Do we have an option to put a PIF in West Glenwood?
I think that I will be honest with you, any new retail development that we do in the town of any scale, and you can think of one or two places where that might occur, without question, a PIF is going to be part of the financing stack to make that happen. I can't think of a retail development that I've done anywhere in the state of Colorado, because that's where I'm licensed to practice, and I work on a number of these in various communities, that a PIF, a metro district and a PIF has not been part of the retail stack or of the financing stack, and typically in conjunction with some kind of a tax sharing program to at some level to make those properties go. It is extraordinarily difficult to do retail, new redevelopment retail right now in this climate. It just is. So the answer is, if those areas wanted to form a metro district and impose a PIF on themselves, they could. Keeping in mind, and I do want to help orient, I think, a little bit, that if the city, for instance, were to say, yeah, we think that it's worth pursuing this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, because it is a private covenant. Those retailers out there have to agree to it. And I will be honest, if I were Target or Lowe's, I would look very skeptically at this, because they view it as a competitive disadvantage. And those are city streets that should be being rebuilt with the city's dollars that they're collecting on sales tax. If you're that retailer, that's kind of how you'd be looking at it and thinking about it. So yeah, the answer is yes. I think we're going to see those, and we're going to see those in major redevelopments in West Glenwood in particular, if that goes forward.
So is it a bit of a gamble if we support this, that it would then, the next step would be to get the approval of those large box
I don't know if Steve Shopflick would call it a gamble, because I don't think he's a gambling person. But it is a calculated risk.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for answering all those, you guys.
Thanks, Ingrid. Paula, then Charlie. Paula, you're muted. Paula, you're muted. Paula?
Got it. Thank you. Thank you for your patience in explaining this to all of us. We all have those questions, confusion. Kind of going back on what Steve said earlier, our senior debt is, this senior debt, not our senior debt, is for paying off things that were agreed by the developer at the beginning in 2002 or whatever, like creating a roundabout and that type of stuff. Those were agreed by the developer that they would pay for that. And now what we are asking is people to pay 1% to pay off the debt of some of those things that were agreed to by the developer to put in place to do this development. Am I getting that correctly?
Sort of, but
okay.
So the agreement and the understanding, the agreements at the time were that certain, so understanding first that there is a metropolitan district out there. So it is a quasi-governmental entity that it handled financing and construction of all of the both on-site and off-site public improvements that the development was responsible for. So they issued debt just like we would because they had a revenue stream. They issued debt to pay off so that they could construct those things, including money for the 8th and Midland, money for 114, improvements internal to it. I believe, and Steve Schoflet can correct me if I'm wrong, those are 25-year bonds. So a refinancing now, part of the refinancing now is because those bonds would be paid off when the PIF sunsets in 5 years. But in order to bring that 4 or 5 million to the city today, that debt needs to be refinanced. So it was always understood that that was the financing mechanism to pay for those public improvements. So it's not as if they're asking to pay for something new that wasn't agreed to at the time. It's refinancing that debt that was agreed to at the time.
And so from what I understand from what you just said, and thank you for bearing with me, Carl.
Oh, no worries.
Is that if we did not approve this in 2025 or 2026, when this PIF finishes, they're responsible for paying off that debt.
Well, so there are two tranches. There's two series of debt. There's a senior debt that went out to the open market. It was bought by financial institutions, the general public, investment trusts, those kinds of things. So that debt, yes, that debt would be paid off. There is still junior debt that was issued that the developers essentially purchased the certificates for themselves, that is at the bottom of the waterfall that Steve Schoflet has been describing. So that public debt has to be paid off. It will be paid off in 2025 or 2026 if you guys don't do anything with the 1.5 PIF where it is today. But there again, in order, if there's going to be additional money today, obviously the revenue stream can't be altered unless you go back to the lender and say, the bondholders, and say, hey, we want to refinance this and pay that all off today, and refinance what that remaining, whatever, 4 years of debt that is left on the initial issuance.
Okay, that helps. And just explain to me why giving this a different name as a private covenant doesn't conflict with Tabor.
Because it's exactly that. This is a public improvement fee is a fee. It is agreed to by the property owners to be collected on behalf of the Metropolitan District. So it is not a tax because it is a privately agreed to improvement fee. So it's, what's that? Yeah, well, I mean, it is, it's much like issuing, I mean, we do this all the time. There are a wide variety of debt mechanisms that do not implicate Tabor. There are certificates of participation, COPs. A great example is the jail was built with those. We have, we did a lease purchase agreement to complete improvements at the community center for the pool. Those kinds of commitments that are subject to annual appropriations. So you can choose to make that payment or not. So there are a variety of debt mechanisms that are not implicated by Tabor.
It'd be so, thank you for that. And I understand what you're saying. I kind of go back to what Shelley was asking about when people come to us and say, when is that tax going to be finished? And it's very hard for us to go through all that to tell them that this is not a tax. This is.
Well, I mean, I think that the answer is, yeah, I mean, people are going to view it however they do. The answer is, if you choose to do nothing tonight, it ends in 2025 or 2026.
Right.
And it's done. And that's one of the choices. Absolutely. So there again, I mean, I think it's just, how council wants to prioritize capital improvement projects, right?
Right.
Because keeping in mind that the roads out there, Wolfson and West Meadows, I always get them confused on whether it's east or west. All of those are public streets, right? They're all part of our public street system. And as Ingrid pointed out, or Steve or somebody, it's the largest revenue generator commercial area we have in the community. So they're probably something we should take care of it.
Well, I appreciate all the explanations in a very complicated topic.
Thanks, Paula. Looks like Charlie.
So Carl, I appreciate your explanation because that's what I thought, but I want to make sure. So if I talk about when Steve uses day one debt as 10 million, he's using the 4.5 million roughly that they still owe that would otherwise get paid off over the next 3 or 4 years, correct?
Right. So that has,
day one,
that has to be refinanced, and then the additional money to provide that cash payment to the city of 4 million, 4.5. That also has so that package has to be financed.
And we're going to get if we under the current structure, what we're talking about, if the city agrees to this, we would get 4 million day one, which would, I don't know, somewhere in the next period of time that would happen. And then we would get another $1 million in maintenance over the course of the next 15 years, correct?
Yeah, I believe that's the breakdown.
Okay, all right. So in just trying to do rough numbers, if I took, and I'm just, this is a question because I'm trying to understand what happens, but if we get $2 million a year from 1.5, that one would be roughly 1.3 million. If my numbers are right. I think they're right. If you take that times 15 years, that brings in $32.5 million over 15 years. If more money comes in, that's without any increase. And you know, in the years I've been working with the city budget, we go up on an average 3% a year. We had the off year of 2020, but other than that, usually goes up at least 3% a year. So even without any increase, it's going to be 32.5 million. And my question is, if there's enough money out there over the next 15 years to give to tenants some payback to keep them, get them on board on this project, because they don't have to get on board the project. If there's that extra money, there's extra money left out there, can the agreement be drafted in such a way that we can get some more money after that's all been taken care of? That is, can the city get more money to help in the improvements that we have to do? Because the 4 million is not, as I understand it, it's not going to pay for everything we need to do in that area.
I'm sorry, if I might ask a question, Charlie, could you walk me through that 32 million? 1.3 million times 20 is close to 32 million. Times 15 is 19 million.
Well, hang on. You could be right, Steve. I had a calculator because I wasn't trying to do it by hand. So I put 1.3 times 15.
It's about 19.5, Charlie.
19.5. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah,
I did something wrong. Thank you.
But it's a good escalator. I like escalators like that.
I do too. So okay.
To answer your question, Charlie, I think we could potentially do two things. In all honesty, and I've done both. One is in that waterfall. Is to have the PIF end as soon as junior debt is paid, or to have it continue on some kind of a share back basis with the Metro District. So it could be either one of those two things. I think is entirely possible if we get approval from the tenants to move forward. If you guys decide you want to move forward and then the tenants do. I've seen both, keeping in mind that you're talking about an event in 10 to 11 years where that waterfall event in you would hope would happen, right?
I agree.
Which is okay.
Last question I have, as I understood this, and maybe I read it wrong again, is that we're going to do this day one, which is somewhere I would assume this year, 2022, as it would be the goal. Are we going to reduce the PIF to 1% on day one, or are we keeping it at 1.5 for the next 3 years? And if we're keeping it at 1.5, why?
I think that's a Steve Shoflet question. I actually can't answer that off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've looked at it at a bunch of different angles. The plan is to be, so we're clear, is that the PIF at 1.5 has been approved through 2025, and we were going to leave it and amend it as it goes forward to 1% from 2026 going on. And it's really just an underwriting of bonds and waterfalls. Well, we could lower it sooner, but then everybody has to take less. And that includes everybody.
And maybe, and I appreciate that, Steve, and that's what I'm trying to understand. Okay.
Yeah, look, there's no magic. We're trying to financially figure out, well, how long you know, you could do the same thing. Well, great, let's cut it down to 5 years, but now the PIF needs to be 3%. We thought it was important that the PIF be reduced. Right,
I agree with you.
Right, we
I
thought
agree
that
with
it's
you.
important that we reduce the PIF. We think it's first and foremost important that the roads get improved, and that's a $4 million cost. And candidly, they need to be maintained better than they have in the past, and that's a $1 million cost. And then to get the tenants to go along, we have to give them something. And for the landowners, so it's not science, it's math, I guess. And
No, Steve, I understand all the dynamic. I was just trying to understand how the numbers work. And even though I hit the calculator wrong, I think usually have a pretty good sense of numbers, and I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the overall goal for everybody here, what we're trying to do. So I do appreciate that. So thank you for your patience and correcting my math.
I was like, gosh, I like your math better than mine.
I see no more hands up for questions. I was going to take public comment because this is not something we've had any public comment or discussion on. So, we don't have to take public comment on it, but is everybody okay if we see if anybody from the community wants to jump in? Okay.
It's like one person, Jonathan.
So far, yeah. Let's see. Gary Vick. Go ahead, Gary.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute my machine.
You're fine.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the opportunity. I would, from observing what's been discussed tonight, I would just like to ask council if any of you understand the numbers. Hearing no response, I'm guessing that you don't. And I think it might be worthwhile, as many questions as you were asking, that you ask for a different kind of presentation. Maybe there's materials in the packet that need to be reviewed more thoroughly. Some simple sources and uses tables. I used to be CFO for several large companies, and I was always taught to make my financial presentations such that, and this is not, I don't mean this to be derogatory to anyone, but you make your presentation so that a 12-year-old can understand it. And that way a busy, smart manager who is not up to speed on the topic will get the gist. And I didn't see that tonight. So I would encourage you to delay this until you get the answers to your question. One question I have is what happens to the junior debt if you don't approve this? It appears, I believe I heard someone say that the senior debt would be repaid and the junior debt would not. Who gets stiffed on that? What does that do to the city's credit perception if we issue bonds, put junior bonds in place and don't repay the junior bonds? There's a lot to think about here. And I don't think anyone, if I were to ask any of the council members to summarize what they're being asked to vote on, I'll give any of you $100 if you can do it. And that's all I've got. I would just say, get the data before you make up your minds. And I don't think you have it yet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gary. I'm hard to see with that timer up, Ryan, if there's other people in the public that want to comment. Ryan, do you mind taking that timer off? Sorry.
We got Todd Hurst who wants to talk now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Todd, go ahead. Ryan, could you reset the timer?
Good evening, council. We're on the topic of the PIF. From many years ago, I thought that the PIF was to do public improvement fees. A lot of the deterioration of the roads over there the Glenwood Meadows is due to the construction on the lofts and everything. And I thought that the contractors were supposed to be responsible for repairing the roads back to their normal capacity. So my question is the city paying for that, or is the contractors actually paying for the roads to be returned to normal before the PIF is incorporated? I think that's all I have on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. It looks like I don't see any other hands. Anybody else? All right, I'll bring it back to council. I guess I'll start off. I don't always have to be the last one to summarize everything, so I'll lead off this time. I think that I hate to have to agree with Gary Vick. But we don't understand the numbers because we're just getting a lot of these numbers explained to us tonight for the very first time. I think that's tough. We've been talking about this, tangentially for 6 months. I don't see that there's a huge urgency to this. I think that this is something that we can do 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, and get those numbers when we need to get them. I'm looking at or hearing senior debt and junior debt and waterfall, and as long as we're talking about absolute numbers and waterfall repayments, honestly, I think that if our 5 million is one of the first parts of the waterfall, I don't really care about the other people down on the lower end of the waterfall. Just from the city side, I don't have to care about some of those folks. Though, to put it in, I think more layman's terms, that it feels like this was given to the voters, was promised to be 20 years, and then it was sunset. And now we're not doing that. We're contemplating not doing that. And if I take a 20-year mortgage out on my house, at the end of 20 years, it's paid off. I don't, unless I take out more debt, and unless I refinance or take out a HELOC or something like that, after 20 years, after the term has expired, the debt is paid off and I own it free and clear, and then I go on. I totally agree with Carl that any new major development in this community is going to have a PIF and a TIF and every other 3-letter word associated with it. But that's for a new development. I am not aware of any development that gets PIFs after they've been in business for 20 years. Now maybe I'm just not aware of the development world, but that's just something new for me. Usually we do these things to get these things off the ground, to get them started, to pull the cord. And I think that, at the end of the day, we can call it a covenant, we can call it a PIF, but most people in the community were sold this as this is a tax that you didn't vote on, but it's okay because it'll go away in 20 years. And I think while I'm not unsupportive of this or finding ways to pay for different things we want, for good or bad, we live in a state that's become very used to Tabor, and for the citizens to weigh in on tax, property and sales tax increases. And this is a renewal. I think the community is I feel that this is a renewal. I will not say what the community feels. I feel this is a renewal on a tax that was promised to sunset. And if it is renewed, I think that the community should have an opportunity to vote on it. And so I don't feel comfortable. So for that reason, I guess I'll just throw out a motion to deny this. That's not a motion to deny this forever. I feel that if the developer wants to come back in a couple of months, 6 months, with clearer numbers and a clear plan that outlines the details of these numbers and can make a presentation that the community can understand as well as us, because I have an MBA with an emphasis in financing, and I don't understand this. I think at that point that I would absolutely want to entertain that. I will absolutely put it on the agenda, and I think that is something worthwhile. But I think for tonight, instead of continuing it for 2 weeks and trying to put pressure on everybody, I think at this point, my motion is to simply deny the extension of this PIF.
Could I hear that motion again, Jonathan? I'm sorry.
I will simplify it. I'm just going to motion to deny the extension of this PIF and to allow the existing PIF to sunset as promised in 2025.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
Carl, can I get clarity on if we deny this?
Can we
that
first,
we can
before
have it brought
Paul
back?
asks a question, Mr. Godis, so we can move along, can we see if there's not a second? And then
I'm trying to determine if I'm
Ms.
going to do a
Paula,
second,
please,
Tony.
you talk a lot and you ask a lot of questions, and maybe we can move along. It's 9 o'clock. I just wanted clarity on Mr. Godis's motion. Is it failed for lack of a second or not?
I think
Back to my question before
No,
I second.
I object to her question, Mr. Mayor, until I know whether your motion has been seconded or not.
All right, I'll second it. Carl, could you clarify whether or not if this is denied, that they'll be able to come back? Because there's been a couple of times where we've passed something and denied it, and that was it. That was the end of the story.
I think that's up to them, whether they decide they want to come back. I have no idea if they will or not.
And so my question is, they could come back,
They
right?
could come back. And I would point out, I think to clarify, because I think maybe the mayor is
confused. Go ahead.
Confused.
Yeah.
We actually spent some time in detail going over some of these numbers on a kind of a one-on-one basis, just so you guys had plenty of time to think about it over the last 6 or 7 months. That having been said, I don't know what message the tenants will hear from this, or the Metro District, or Mr. Schafflick's organization on a denial. And more importantly, I guess from my standpoint, whether you deny it or not, I think the important thing, I think from staff's perspective, is that the roads out in Glenwood Meadows need to get fixed. It's a really important commercial area to us, whether we do it this way or we do it some other way. I think that's really all staff is concerned about. The mechanism is not nearly as important to staff.
And let me ask you one further question. If this motion is not passed, can we look at a motion of a continuance and give more time? Because even if you went over this one-on-one with us, apparently our memory is not that complete.
Right, and
we do need more clarification.
I guess I think there was on our side, on my side, we should have put in the summary sheet with the numbers of the 4.5 in senior debt, the $4 million to the city, and some of the rough estimates going beyond that, as well as maybe a back of the envelope and what you can actually, what are the finance costs on $9 to $10 million to reissue that debt. So that's on me. So I apologize for that.
Deborah, you have your hand up. Do you want to interject?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if this is denied, staff will bring back a proposal for how to pay for these roads. I will just let you know it will include using our American Rescue dollars and potentially some other sources of funding, because we really do think these roads need to be fixed.
So Paul, your hand is up. I'm sorry. You seconded the motion. Shelley had comments in front of you. Sorry. So Shelley, go ahead.
I would just like to say whether I'm willing to support this motion, but I'm also willing to support a motion for continuance. I do think it's very important that we have further clarity and transparency. And I do remember going over some of these numbers, Carl, when we, several months ago.
Right.
But I think my specific questions at that time were that I wouldn't be willing to consider this unless we had very clear transparency on the numbers. We're not seeing that. I've watched for the last 20 minutes as, Councillor Willman and others were trying to do calculations at home and on the back of a number. And frankly, I don't understand how we can be expected to support something that is not clear on the numbers. And I'm a numbers person. And so I expect to see either spreadsheets or some type of cash flow or some type of estimates of, inflow and outflow on this. So it's, until I see that, I can't see supporting this. I understand the roads need to get fixed, but we have good tax revenue, thankfully, from Meadows, and I'm not faulting Meadows or the development as a whole, but trying to understand these numbers and this debt. And I do agree that a promise was made to our community that this would be a 20-year PIF. I question, I understand the help and the dollar per square foot going back to the businesses. But I also question it seems to me that that's somewhat of a subsidy of their tenant rates. So I'd like to have that explained to me of how that's not. If there's pressure on them, there are tenancy rates involved in that equation also. So I guess until I have further clarity, I can't support this proposal. Thank you.
Charlie, sorry. I kept saying Charlie, but I was muted and wondering why you didn't take yourself off mute as I was muted.
I think Paula was ahead of me. I don't know if she actually got a chance to comment. She had some questions, but I don't think she had a chance to comment. She was ahead of me.
I'm good. My questions were around seconding the motion. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. I can't support this motion. I think it's a bad message to send here. When we looked at increasing street tax 2.5-3 years ago, now almost 3 years ago, we're looking at $30 million in street projects. And we have done them by again, back of the envelope, in my head calculations, about 10 of those, and we still have $20 million in street projects. That didn't include anything, as I remember, Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, in this Meadows area, maybe it did. I agree with the staff that we need to fix these streets and we need to do it sooner rather than later. I don't want to see other neighborhoods throughout the town not get taken care of, because we need to take care of this to keep our revenue generation up. I think it's a short-sighted move. I share with what Shelley said. I'm concerned about not having those numbers. I thought I had them pretty well in my head. When we had the meetings with Carl, I think I understood them. Unfortunately, that was 4 or 5 months ago. And while Carl's been working with us and staff's been working with this in between, we have not. And those things are not something that those aren't the kind of things you keep in your mind. So my view where we ought to be tonight is either say, yeah, we generally support the concept. And if we don't support the concept at all, that's the vote. We don't support increasing this or letting it go on so that we can get this money to fix those roads. And remember, the 4 million is not going to do all the repairs we need to do, including the improvements to the intersections. 20 years ago, the city council negotiated some deals and allowed a lot of development in whatever, and I'm not critical because I would have done the same thing 20 years ago, but we didn't have money to figure out additional traffic impacts. And I learned recently, we couldn't add that when we were increasing the number of, we were adding the lofts and we're adding the development that we approved at last meeting. So the bottom line of all this is we don't have the resources within the city to do this. Yet I agree with what Ingrid said earlier. A lot of this money, just like our other sales tax revenue, comes from out of the area people supporting our community who come in and use our facilities, including these roads to go to these places. So I would like to, if you really feel it, and I agree, we probably need better numbers. We ought to continue this and get those numbers before we make a up or down decision. But if I'm going to make an up or down decision today, mine would be an up decision with the idea that I want to see what the final numbers look like. If they're waterfalls, as I understand the term, if there's money at the end, we ought to be sharing that. And that's where we don't have the numbers to be able to figure that out now. But that's what staff might be working on between now and when they come back to us with the final quote-unquote approval. Please don't interrupt me, Mr. Hirsch.
Steve Davis, you're up. Are you done, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm almost. And I really try to be brief. I rarely go on and like, but this is an important issue for this community. This is not a minor issue. This is not something we can decide in 15 or 20 minutes. This is how we continue to maintain a significant economic force in this community And if we don't pay attention to that and vote intelligently on that issue, we're making a mistake. We're looking right in front of us rather than 20 years down the line of what's going to mean for the city and how we continue to fix these roads and keep this economic generator there. So I'm against the current motion.
Councilor Davis.
I cannot support the mayor's motion. I think that's the wrong way to approach this. I think that, and I would say that, you know, once we vote on his motion and the second that's been made, I'm willing to follow that up with a motion to table this for 60 days in the hopes of having more clarity, detail, and transparency before we make a decision on this issue.
Councilor Wusso, thanks you, Councilor Davis.
So I too will not be supporting the motion on the table, and I would be very comfortable adding my support to Councilor Davis's suggestion of a 60-day continuation to give us more details, keeping in mind that in the event that at every moment moving forward, those roads are our responsibility at this point. So we are going to have to pay for them. We can't retroactively go back and say, if the roads don't last a certain amount of time, developers are going to have to come back in here. Those roads they belong to us. And if we don't have the funds to improve them, we will have to find it somewhere, which means that we may pull it from another subdivision or something else that's slated to be done. And knowing that it is such an important location for tax revenue, of course, we're going to prioritize that, which means that we are going to disappoint other people in the community and or not satisfy some goals that we've already set. So moving forward, I don't want anybody to look at this as though, like, why didn't this happen? Or why is the developer X, Y, or Z? The fact of the matter is that they did in effect satisfy their end of it. Unfortunately, those roads needed to be repaired and or updated far sooner than we expected. And while the developer and the builders are still there, their responsibility is, my understanding, is only the roads that they're impacting. So this is just how communities grow, and we have to be making a game plan for how to get these roads back up to the shape that they need to be in so that they're safe and they're efficient for our community members and also the others who come into our community from surrounding towns. So I think y'all know where I stand.
Mr. Mayor, I apologize. I forgot one thing. Mr. Hurst asked a question we didn't answer, and that is, and Carl, correct if I'm wrong, the loft developers have paid to fix the roads that they screwed up. The
agreement on lofts 3 and 4, both those agreements have, they need to be repairs. We also have, they're fairly specific as to how construction traffic comes in and how they stage and where and things like that. So that has been on the mind of both engineering and public works through those developments.
Ryan, let's call the question.
That's what I meant when I said their responsibility are the developers that are there now.
Call the question, Ingrid, please.
Hey, Councilor Hershey.
Ingrid, please. Stop. It's 9:15.
Mayor Godis.
Yes.
Councilor Kaut.
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Wilman.
No.
Councilor Wusso.
No.
Councilor Davis.
No.
Councilor Stepp.
No.
Councilor Hershey.
No.
It fails 6-1.
Councilor Davis.
Or 1-6.
Okay. You know, for reasons like I'm not willing to tell Mark Adler that we're not going to be able to do Red Mountain because we have to go pave out by the Meadows instead, I would make a motion that we table this decision and conversation for 60 days to allow staff and I don't know, the developer, the owner, to bring us back more clarity, transparency and information, more detailed information.
Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
second that.
Oh, sorry, Ingrid. You can second it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Been moved by Counselor Davis, seconded by Counselor Russo. Any comments on or questions? Ryan, let's call the question.
I just real quick comment, if I can, Mr. Mayor, and I don't want to belabor this, but I agree with the transparency, and we ought to have spreadsheets and the stuff we asked at that time, and so it ought to be in the packet so the public can see it too. They understand what we're doing and why. Because I agree, they need to weigh in on this issue. So I don't want to make sure, I don't want just something that we have, nobody else. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved by, Counselor Davis, second by Counselor Russo. Any further conversation? Go ahead, Shelley.
Just a quick comment. I'm going to vote for this extension for 60 days, but I definitely want to see the transparency, but I can't say that I'm necessarily on board with these numbers and agreements yet. So I'll just leave it at that.
Ryan, let's call the question. Oh, I'm sorry. Paula, your hand's up.
I just want to follow up with what Shelley just said, is that I felt like pressured in the last move to second a motion so I could get some clarity. And I still am not 100% on what I'll do in 60 days from now, but I do prefer this method that Steve has proposed.
Anybody else? Ryan, let's call the question.
Counselor Hershey,
Yes.
Counselor Davis,
Yes.
Counselor Russo,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman,
Yes.
Counselor Stepp,
Yes.
Counselor Kaut,
Yes.
Mayor Godus.
No.
6-1, it passes.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Conflict. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. I know it's late.
Sorry. Thank you very much.
No worries.
All right. Next on the agenda, last item on the agenda is, no, not last item. Employee online merchandising store.
No, actually, you skipped over one. Resolution 2204 regarding South Canyon land fee setting.
That's hoping to get to one of my favorite ones. Okay, now item number 17, South Canyon landfill fee. Go ahead, Matt.
Could you bring Liz across?
Absolutely.
Please. To get started, we attached the landfill fees presentation that we did last time. I shortened it by many slides so that it was out there in the public. If somebody in the work session didn't see that, Liz can breeze through that real quick if you want. Or we can go straight to having a discussion about the resolution and the fees attached to it, which are exactly what was presented last time. If you want to do that. I know it's late. I kind of want to see where you want to go with this.
I'll take feedback from anybody.
I see Shelley going fast. Make it fast.
Okay.
Somebody could make a motion.
I'm going to make a motion.
Well,
I'll second it.
Do you guys?
Make your
Okay, perfect.
clarity. Let's make sure we get the motion in.
So resolution 2022-04. Oh, there's an echo. City Council of Glenwood Springs setting 2022 landfill fees. I will make a motion to approve as it's currently written and recommended by our Public Works Director.
I will second. It's been moved by Councilor Russo, seconded by myself. Any further conversation? I see a couple hands up. I think I just didn't hear them last time. Is that Councilor Davis? No. Yes, go ahead,
Yeah,
Councilor.
no, I was just going straight for the motion as well, because I thought we had a very thorough discussion and presentation on this 2 weeks ago. I was surprised we didn't vote on it then.
Okay. Ryan, let's call the question.
Mayor Pro Tem Wellman,
before I vote, there is some in the public. This is a public issue about what we're going to charge for rates. And I was trying to raise my hand to do that, but or say something, but I was unable to do that.
I'm sorry, Charlie. I apologize. Fair enough. Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jennifer Vanian, 1016 Minter Avenue. I support the rates. I'm happy that you guys are taking the time to look over the rates for the landfill. One rate that I would like to see examined more closely is tear downs. And I think it would be really wonderful if somehow council could wrap their heads around finding some incentive for restaurants to get the food out of the landfill. I think it's just really important. And the time to start was yesterday or last year or 10 years ago. There's methane leak for this whole community, and it's the one thing we can do for climate change. And I think once people change their habits, then it's a better world. So I hope that somebody can get in there and try and wrap their heads around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Charlie, thank you for pointing that out. I'm sorry. I did not see her in the public and I did not see your hand, so I apologize. I see your hand now and I see Steve Davis's hand. Are both of those comments? Do you have any other comments on this motion? Go ahead, Charlie.
Just briefly, I just want Jennifer to be aware that we did look at that issue during our work session, and that is something we're continuing to work on. And our landfill director is looking at all those issues. So it was a significant discussion we had during our work session at our last meeting. So just because it's not there right now doesn't mean we're not thinking about it and trying to consider that.
Ryan, let's call the question.
Mayor Pro Tem Willman.
Yes.
Councillor Kaup.
Yes.
Councillor Hershey.
Yes.
Councillor Stepp.
Yes.
Mayor Godis.
Yes.
Councillor Davis.
Yes.
Councillor Russo.
Yes.
All right, 7-0.
All right.
Thank you, council, and thank you, Liz, for hanging out.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Matt.
Mhm.
Unless you're going to be around to present on the employee online merchant store.
I can if you want.
No, I'd rather have Brianna.
You can go, Matt. That's fine with me.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion to continue item 18.
Is there a second? Looks like motion dies for lack of a second. Go ahead, Brianna.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Quickly, this item is about a few members of council said that they were interested in offering apparel that is branded with the city logo for city staff and for city council to be worn at work-related functions and events. Without getting into all the details, which there are numbers and all sorts of fun stuff in the staff report, the options for this are certainly wide, both in terms of the products themselves and their prices. Certainly there's a difference between the cost of, say, a trucker hat and the cost of a heavy winter coat. There are numbers we've got 190 full-time employees, 120 part-time employees. And then in terms of the actual items themselves, we wanted to make sure that we were considering that we still have supply and chain shortages with all these materials. So making sure that anything that we have in there exist, without having a huge back order, that they have a large range in sizes, that we have different sort of color style options. And sort of those are some of the things that we were looking at. With that, there's a link to a sample online store that we put together with specialty incentives and business based here in Glenwood Springs that runs the online store for both SGM and Holy Cross. staff would defer to council if they are interested in providing this sort of option.
Go ahead, Paula.
Do we have a line item in the budget for this? And do we have an estimate of costs? The way I'm reading it is we would give everybody basically a dollar amount and say go out and buy gear. And I'm just trying to figure out how we figured this out budget wise.
It is not in the budget. This is a city council request from 2 members of council that we're bringing to you. If it's something you want to do, you will have to amend the budget. I think we're anticipating if we give everybody like $200 full-time employees, that's like $30,000.
So just real quick, I recall from the budget process back in July when you were so gregarious. You said, is there anything else you guys want? I said, I would love this. I would follow for this to be included in the 2022 budget. Did it not get included in the 2022 budget that we ended up passing?
I do not remember you saying that, and no, it did not. That being said, if this is something council really wants to do, $30,000 spread over multiple departments will not hit any one budget too hard. So it's really just, is it something council wants us to do?
I have one more question.
Sure.
Do we provide clothing for any of the departments due to kind of what they have to do and that
Yes.
type of thing? And can you tell me what that is?
I think it depends. Each department's a little different, right? I think Jen, like her department, the building inspectors, they essentially kind of have uniforms they can wear that they pick. Obviously fire, police, their entire clothing that they wear here is budgeted for and paid for. So it's different. Like I don't have, not that I want it, I don't have like a clothing allowance. It's really for our employees that go into people's houses so they can look official.
And when I'm reading this is like if there's an event. So is this really for when you go somewhere, Deborah or Jen goes somewhere, to be able to identify Glenwood Springs? Or is it for our staff members when they're out in the community in general, just to have a logo on their shirt kind of thing? I'm trying to get a sense of why we're doing this. So, and I know we brought it to you, or some of us brought it to you, but I'm just trying to get a sense of.
Maybe I'll jump in there as somebody who is advocating for it.
Great, that would be great.
I remember pretty clearly in that budget work session asking for it to be included, and remember Eager and I talked about it, and I remember somebody going like, "Wow!" Out of all the, I think probably you're like, "What?" like swag. So I know it's discussed, and the reason why is, I mean, I worked, and where it came from is I worked at the city of Aspen like 15 years ago, and they, the employees, it was you felt really valued when there would be an event, and they'd just be like, "Here's a shirt for you for today," or "Here's a really nice hooded sweatshirt." I still wear it all the time. I have like 5 really high quality pieces of gear that are Obermeyer, Patagonia, Marmot branded gear that say City of Aspen with a nice leaf on it. It's not like I have this hat that was given to me, which is nice, but when I'm in the community and this is just me as a representative of council or councilors, but I think employees, whether they get to go out and service people, and interact with them, I think people feel good. And I'm proud of our brand. And Aspen has a fantastic brand. They put it over everything, and they give out clothes and swags to everybody. We're just talking about putting it at least on our employees. I would love to see people in this community take a really, have a great pride in that logo and have it on a bunch of cool gear. So when visitors come to our community, or other people, go home to visit their family in Iowa, like that is something that helps, I think, the branding of the entire community. But really, I'll just say that from an employee standpoint, it was really cool to get high quality gear occasionally with the Aspen brand on it, because it was just nice. And so for that's the reason I suggested, and I think Councilor Wusso also was supportive of that, putting that in the 2022 budget. So that's where it came from.
Thanks.
Go ahead, Councilor Wusso.
You know, so many of my comments are going to echo yours, Mayor. So I actually want to allow Steve Davis, who at every juncture, I feel like he has a pretty good grasp on it because of the apparel component of his business. So let's let him go next.
Councilor Davis.
All right. I think it's a great program. I would make a motion to approve the online merchandise store for employees. I'm not sure how you define the full-time, part-time aspect of it, but I think for full-time employees, up to $200 annually would be a good program.
I would second that because you said full-time, and I don't want to prevent staff if we have a regular part-time person that works 20 hours a week year-round or a seasonal person that works full-time. I don't want to limit them from being able to enjoy some part of this benefit. I guess I would ask for your amendment to allow staff to determine that.
Yeah, and I think prorated percentage of hours or something like that at their discretion is fine. I was just saying $200 for full-time, and then however that falls out to part-time.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Ingrid.
So I'm going to jump back in now and say that I obviously will support this motion. I think that the department heads or their, people within their jurisdiction can absolutely handle how this is allocated. I think we just give this money, let them do it. They have a, good trusted relationship with their employees. One thing I would like to see is still more diversity in that store. I'd love to just see some cotton hoodies, just old school things your teenagers love as well. So that's one thing I would like to see as an addition. And I think that maybe that will come with time or if we could get some feedback from staff on what they'd like to see in that store before anything's ordered. Exactly. Like Jonathan is throwing up there right now.
I literally wear this every day.
You didn't
need
need
other comments. I know, I probably need to do more laundry. Ryan, let's call the question.
I had a comment before we called the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Tony, I didn't see your hand.
Well, I hope in 2023, when I leave, I still get a free hat, Deborah, but this is a colossal waste of time and money, so I'm going to object. Thank you.
Okay. Shelley.
I'll just say, I like the concept, but I can't support an annual allotment. I was thinking it would be something more of like a reward for a certain amount of service or a certain achievement, something like that. So that's just where I'm at.
All right, let's call the question.
All right. Mayor Pro Tem Wellman.
I object. I was first last time. Yes. Just kidding.
Well, you're going first every single time now.
All right.
Councilor
Yes.
Wusso. Councilor Wusso.
Yes.
All right. Mayor Godis.
Yes.
Councilor Stepp.
No.
Councilor Kaut.
No.
Councilor Hershey.
No.
Councilor Davis.
Yes.
It passes 4-3. I'll see you through my cool.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. Report from the city manager.
You missed something, Mr. Mayor.
Did I again? I'm so sorry. I'm looking at changing ours number 19. Changing the name of the Tourism Promotion Board, the Tourism Management Board. I'll make a motion to do that. Is there a second?
Second.
It's a public hearing.
Thanks. Sorry. Appreciate that, Carl. Anybody from the public like to comment on this? Seeing none, I'll remake that motion. Tony has the second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. All right. Now we are down to the city manager report.
I wanted to get an idea if any of you wanted to take my place on the Garfield County Access to Health group. It is something that was initiated about a year ago. Garfield County was looking at potentially a county-wide tax to provide mental health. A group's been going along. They're getting really close to a tax initiative, and I think it's more appropriate for somebody else to be in that space soon.
Go ahead. I see Tony and Ingrid. Go ahead, Tony.
I was just volunteering, but if Ingrid wants to do it, I would defer to her. Or we could both do it.
Ingrid, you're muted, honey. Oh, honey, geez, sorry. God.
Ingrid, you're muted. Ingrid, you're muted.
Okay, I would like to do it. And Councilor Hershey, if you want to an alternate
Yeah,
position.
sure. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you.
That is all I got. Thank you.
I don't even know where we're at. City Attorney.
I don't have anything, you guys. Thank you, Charlie, for taking care of giving me some direction earlier on tonight on the memo I sent out. If folks have questions on that, feel free to give me a ring.
Okay.
Thank you for putting the memo out. I appreciate that information. So I vote to adjourn.
I will unmute myself and second that.
Well, is there anything else for the good of the order?
We didn't vote on that. Did we? No. Can we vote on the motion to adjourn?
Yeah, just wondering if anybody else had anything else for the good of the order.
Yeah, I know, and nobody said anything.
Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all. See you.
Have a good night.